Hi, Mate 40 here, coming to you live from the Relief Factor Pain-Free Studios. So, there's an adage in radio that would also apply to live streaming, and that is that there are two types of radio hosts. There are those who are thermostats, meaning they set the temperature in the room. So think of a strong personality like a Dennis Prager, a Rush Limbaugh, a J.F. Garapi, a Kevin Michael Grace, a Richard Spencer, a Mike Enoch, Eric Stryker. These are strong personalities, so they set the temperature on a show. They provide the tone that when they enter a conversation, that everyone stands up and takes notice. And these type of radio or YouTube personalities are fairly rare. So much more common are the personalities such as myself. We are not thermostats, we are thermometers. So I come into a room and I read the temperature in the room. I don't set the temperature. I have about 5% of the ability to set the temperature in a room of a stronger personality such as a Kevin Michael Grace, a Richard Spencer, a Rush Limbaugh, a Dennis Prager. I know I've been in the same room with Dennis Prager 100 times. And when Dennis Prager walks into a room, everyone like turns. It's like, whoa, there's Dennis Prager. No, mate, I'm not a thermostat. I'm a thermometer. I'm something you stick in your mouth. Disavow. I depend on my show for the chat and guests and other people that I need to vibe with and vibe against and bat it back and forth. It's like a game of tennis. You know, I hit the ball to you and you got to hit it right back. Yeah, I'm a thermometer. I'm not a thermostat, mate. I'd like to think I'm not a rectal thermometer. I think I'm more of an oral thermometer. Okay, so to be successful in this type of job, to have a show where you share your opinions, be it on the radio or on TV or on YouTube, it requires that you have a great deal of certitude, right? That you come on here and you just speak, look, guys, this is the way it is. The election's been stolen from us. Can you believe it? What the Democrats are doing, the elite are doing to us. They stole this election. The evidence is just irrefutable. And I'm going to show you 18 different examples of how the Democrats stole this election. Right? That's a thermostat. That's someone coming in and setting the tone. Right? Now, I come in and tell you, okay, I've read 2 books on voter fraud and a few academic articles, listened to some podcasts, and it doesn't seem that the Republicans have had, up until now, a strong record proving their case about extensive voter fraud. But this time around, this election does feel different. That I am much more open to believing that there's widespread voter fraud this time around than at any previous time. But when I spot a grifter, a shyster, a manipulator, a company man, just retailing just nonsense in the most authoritative tone, then I'm going to call it out. I'm going to call it out not because I don't believe that there is significant voter fraud this time around. I don't know. I'm going to call it out that it's unfortunate that the people making the case for it just sound so authoritative, right? They just are so compelling. And nobody sounds more compelling than this bloke, Steve
Joe Biden
Fuentes.
claims that he wants to be a healing leader for America. Well, if that's true, then he should not only be agreeing to careful audits of vote returns, he should be encouraging it. Why? Because tens of millions of Americans right now believe that the election is being stolen from them. And they don't believe this without justification. Let's first talk about the statistical improbability of Donald Trump losing, given all the other macro trends in the 2020 election. I'll get much more granular in future videos, but let's take a look at the macro trends. The GOP held 28 of 29 tight House races. It didn't lose one House race for the first time ever. The GOP picked up 3 state legislatures. Trump had the best minority percentage for any Republican in 60 years. And yet Trump loses? That is highly improbable to a lot of clear-thinking Americans. And it means that at the least, we owe them a very careful look at votes. Why? Also because of how close everything is. In these 4 states, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, the vote totals as they stand right now are 0.67 or more narrow. So the idea that we should just go away, that the deplorables should be quiet, that we should accept the word of CNN and Fox News. No. And Joe Biden, if you want to be a healer, you should be encouraging a thorough review of all these results.
Right. Now, how could anyone argue with that? I mean, I can't match this guy's certainty.
Joe Biden claims that he wants to be a healing.
Wow, I can't even get the right video.
Folks, I published an op-ed in the National Pulse about the statistical improbability of the Biden win. Now, I want to be clear here that the statistical case is compelling, but it is not conclusive. It is circumstantial. What it does is points to the improbability of these results, and it demands that we thoroughly audit and investigate these results. Now, I give 4 reasons. I'm going to do 4 videos. The first one is turnout. Turnout was exceedingly high and in the places that Joe Biden needed it. Again, that defies logic. In Wisconsin, for example, statewide turnout was over 90%. To put that in context, the country of Australia, voting is mandatory. You get fined if you don't vote, and their turnout is only 92%. Within Wisconsin, Milwaukee was critical. Not surprisingly, that provided more than all, of the surplus for Biden in the state. He won Milwaukee by 145,000 votes. Turnout in Milwaukee was a stunning 84%. It's pretty hard to believe if you put it in comparison with another Midwestern city, similar demographics, similar size, Cleveland. Turnout was only 51%. Are we really to believe that Milwaukee...
Okay, so this guy is incredibly compelling, right? How on earth could you not believe this guy? He seems like the most honest, forthright dude around. He seems like he's done his homework. He seems very careful in how he's couching everything. This guy seems to have expertise, but he doesn't. He's making up these numbers. This is false. The turnout in Wisconsin was not 90%. It was 73%. It wasn't even the highest that Wisconsin's ever had. Right? There's a big difference between 90% and 73%. Milwaukee's turnout wasn't 84%. It was 78%. Right? There's a significant difference. So his case is undercut by his lousy statistics. But yeah, he sounds amazing.
Naturally had turnout that much higher than Cleveland. It really strains credibility. It demands further investigation.
You know what strains credibility is getting these elementary statistics wrong and then stating them with such certitude. Like, to me, that destroys credibility. And I want to believe this guy. He sounds great. He's very impressive. He speaks well. He just sounds so confident. He sounds like Dennis Prager. He sounds like the voice of God. How could anyone argue with the voice of God? Believe me. Believe me. And then I just had Dennis Prager's voice all queued up, and my tech just fails me. It's a deep state conspiracy. What can I say? Deep state.
Civil war. No American has had the right to vote away our fundamental God-given freedoms under a moniker of fair play.
So this is Dennis Prager talking with Steve Cortez
that can ever dispossess our foundational God-given freedoms.
And all right, let me hold it there, my friend, because I got to take a break. Thank you. Much more to come. I'm Dennis.
Whoops! I even played. I played the wrong clip. Man, I'm just falling down on the job here. I mean, this isn't why you pay me the big.
I'm Dennis Prager, and it is an honor to be with you. And I'm not joking. I don't take anything in life for granted. And he worked for CNN, and they obviously let him go, especially after his very famous video, which happens to be for PragerU, on the Charlottesville lie. It's a very, very important video. Joe Biden lied. I mean, it's a pure lie. I decided to run for president because of Charlottesville. Remember him saying that? Constantly.
Oh, I sure do. Yeah. And by the way, he's now trying to claim that he's a healer. Well, for one thing, it's hard to be a healer when you launched your campaign, your entire campaign, on the most malicious lie in American public life, the Charlottesville fine people hoax. So it's very tough with that record to be a healer. But I also point out, I actually just put a video up on my Twitter saying if you actually want to be a healer, if you actually mean that, you know what you would do, Joe Biden? You would say, I want to convince the Trump people, I want to convince the deplorables that the votes are accurate. So let's do a full audit. I mean, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he say that? Hey, there are questions here. We have 4 states that are in play. The maximum lead.
So Donald Trump Jr., he tweeted 2 p.m. at November 4, I'm calling BS. This is the claim. He says Wisconsin voter turnout jumped from 67% in 2016 to 89% in 2020, 22% increase. Eric Trump, another one of Donald Trump's sons, posted the same thing on Facebook saying, looks like fraud. Yeah, it does look like fraud, but it's an absurd claim. And it got retweeted by 13,000 people. And it's based on a misunderstanding of basic election math. Right. Wisconsin had more than 3.6 million registered voters heading into Election Day, and more than 3.2 million Wisconsinites voted in the presidential race. Those aren't the numbers used to calculate turnout here. So Wisconsin allows same-day voter registration. So the number of registered voters goes up through the day. In 2016, for example, 13% of voters registered on Election Day. Registered voters is the wrong figure entirely for calculating turnout. Voter turnout in a same-day registration state is based on the percentage of eligible voters who cast a ballot. So you get a turnout rate in Wisconsin, not 90%, but 72.3%. So in 2016, it was 67.3%. 2012, it was 70.4%. And in 2004, it was 72.9%. So it wasn't that extraordinary a turnout. So that's the problem when people making the case for immense voter fraud in the 2020 election don't understand basic math and don't understand how these percentages are calculated, don't understand what voter turnout means.
He has is 0.67%, okay? Fewer than 100,000 votes among those four states of Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona. I'd say 100,000 all in, added together. If he wants to be a healer, one quick way to heal would say, you know what, we need to make sure these votes are legitimate for everyone's sake. And yet, of course, he's doing exactly the opposite. He's been crowned as the president-elect by people like Fox News and CNN. And I think they're of the belief, it's almost like, Dennis, it's football season now. There's a trick in football that I'm sure any fan has seen where when you get away with a controversial, the ref calls it your way, but review would probably overturn it. What does the team do in the NFL? They get right up to the line and snap it immediately because then you can't review the play. That's sort of what the media is trying to do here for Joe Biden. Well, let's just call him president-elect. And if we say 5,000 times over the weekend, it's going to reinforce in people's minds that this is all decided when it is not decided.
Well said. So the problem, as I see it, is December 7th, I think it is the deadline, correct?
Yeah, I think the 8th are right in there. And the 14th, they have to actually vote, correct?
Yes. So
the electors.
What can the Trump people do within this short time span?
Well, no, listen, it's formidable, and I don't want to look. I'm optimistic, and I think we have to fight. Okay, but I'm also realistic, and I will be the first to admit that given the condensed time frame that you're talking about, it is an uphill battle for us. Now, I think it's still a battle worth waging, and we are doing it. I'm speaking to you from campaign headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, and believe me, we are not done fighting. This president isn't either. But to answer your question specifically about how can we get it done that fast in just a matter of weeks, hand recounts.
Okay, do you really want the guy who's your one of your face people, one of your people getting out there making videos, appearing on radio shows, appearing on TV shows, who does not understand basic math and can't calculate correctly and is using false figures? And that's a key point of his whole case, that there's massive voter fraud, that he does not understand basic math.
We know from the Florida 2000 experience they can be done relatively quickly, and if that's what it takes. And by the way, if we win Arizona, and it looks like we're going to by a hair, but it looks like we're going to win Arizona in the next 24 hours, could even be today. If we win there, we're then talking about two states really in play, Georgia and Pennsylvania, potentially Wisconsin as well. So, realize we're not talking about a hand recount potentially of 10 states. We're talking about two, possibly 3 at the very most. That's something America can do. It's something, again, we did in Florida under highly contentious circumstances. At that time, can we do that again? I mean, we think it's realistic to at least try. Again, is it going to succeed? I don't know. And if I'm being honest with the audience, I don't want to give people false hope. I think it's an uphill battle for us. But I also believe we have to wage this uphill battle because I firmly believe, Dennis, that we won the legal vote. I think what the Democrats did, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, is they used the virus as an excuse to absolutely overwhelm a system with mail-in voting, knowing full well that there would be no way that they could properly vet the validity of these votes. And by the way, instead of just my opinion, let me give you a number on that. So Pennsylvania rejected, in this election, they rejected mail-in votes. A total of 0.03% were rejected. Now let's put that in context. Typically in Pennsylvania, they reject about 1%, so 3 times that many. In terms of first-time mail-in voters, because they just make more mistakes, Pennsylvania typically rejects 3% historically. So not 10 times more, 100.
Okay, so the problem is I don't know if he's accurate now because he's made so many mistakes with his statistics that even though I want to believe him, I can't, because he's been so shoddy building his case. So the one foundational point upon which he bases this article, the statistical case against Biden's win, is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong in the most elementary of ways. So now he says some other things that sound very convincing, but I know that this guy is often wrong. I'm looking at a tweet here from Breitbart. Election fraud expert Eric Eggers says Michigan and Pennsylvania, with their weird anomalies this election, are raising tough questions about voter fraud. Right? How is Eric Eggers an expert in voter fraud? The only place on the internet that says Eric Eggers is an expert on voter fraud is on Breitbart. He has a background producing radio shows, and he writes for Peter Schweitzer. He's a researcher for Peter Schweitzer. So Breitbart anoints him a voting fraud expert, but nobody else considers him a voting fraud expert, and many of the things he says are just false. So Eric Eggers put out a report saying data showed that there, and you see this quite a lot, that there are 170 voters in Ohio's 12th congressional district that have birth dates of 1900 and in some cases even 1800. These are all opportunities for fraud. And he said this on an interview with One American News Network. Now, he's correct that records for some voters in the district list birth dates that fall 116 or more years ago, and you see this all throughout the country. What the hell is going on? It does not mean that these people are actually that old. So before 1974, the state did not require voters to provide dates of birth or registration forms. Those who did not enter birth dates back then often had them automatically added as placeholders by the local election boards. So the dates used in those cases were 1800-01-01 or 1900-01-01, or in a few cases, 1901. So no one over 116 voted, says the Secretary of State in Ohio, and we're all on high alert when it comes to fraud, but a lot of it is misplaced, says the Secretary of State spokesman. So you hear it and go, oh my God, people with a birth date of 1800 or 1900, how could they still be voting? And you see this in all sorts of states. Well, that's just a placeholder when people did not provide their birth date when they registered to vote. So there are a lot of claims of voter fraud that sound very impressive on first glance, on first listen, but then when there's a little bit of fact-checking done, they fall apart. So too with the claim that 10,000 dead people voted in Michigan. You do a little fact-checking on that, and the claim, once again, falls apart. You can look at the analysis by ProPublica and CNN on that particular claim.
100 times more than they rejected this time. And compare them to next door New York, their neighboring state. New York had a primary election in June, and they went to mass mail-in voting. And just to show you how much worse the mass nature of it is, of so many people sending in, New York rejected 21% of ballots in June. And so think of that. We're now talking about New York rejected, in its most recent election, it rejected 700 times the rate that Pennsylvania just did.
Wow, these are huge factors, huge. Stay with me, please.
Huge.
Steve Cortez
Huge.
with the president's campaign.
We walk the line.
Is a possibility, obviously, at the AM 590, the answer in Chicago, correct?
Yeah, I will be going back to AM 560.
560, sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
No, yeah, you've got a lot of stations, remember.
That's right.
Okay,
Thank you.
so this guy's a
They were
radio
gracious to allow me. I was supposed
host.
to be start.
That's what he does. He's a radio host. He's working for the Trump campaign. He sounds amazing on the radio. He's very impressive on video, and on radio, he just doesn't do math, and he doesn't understand anything about statistics, and he really has no expertise on voter fraud.
Starting again today, but they knew, of course, with this election still very much in play,
Right.
they graciously extended it for me. And I'm here to certify the win. That's the word I keep using because I firmly believe that we won the legal vote, and I think there is a compelling statistical case to.
I'm here to certify the win, and he's telling us there's a compelling statistical case, but the guy would have failed a basic statistics class. This is not our best and brightest. Come on, can't the Republicans do better than these bozos?
Back that. The only way, though, we can find out is a hand count, is a thorough audit of these votes. And I'll give you another stat that I think is important for the audience out there, and that is the prevalence of Biden-only votes, meaning ballots where they only selected Joe Biden for president and then they did not vote down ballots.
How many of those are there?
There are. We're trying to get the complete count, but we know there are more than 500,000 in total.
You're kidding.
Yes, and that is 3 times more than the last election top ticket only votes. There were only 150,000 last time, so it's more than 3 times. We're already north of 500,000.
This is a fact. This is not a supposition.
Correct. And here's what makes it even more damning, Dennis, is that it only happened as a phenomenon in the battleground states. It did not happen nationwide. So.
Okay, so that sounds really impressive. And the technical term for this is ballot-rolloff. And it's greater than normal this year. Possibly. I don't know. I am not a voting fraud expert. And I'm not going to sit here and proclaim things that I know nothing about. I'm going to try to do this with a great deal of humility because I have a great deal to be humble about. Now, it's called ballot roll-off when people just cast a ballot for the president and then ignore everything else. Now, it may be higher than normal this year because the Biden campaign pushed early voting by mail, and a larger than usual number of voters did not feel that they knew enough or cared enough about down ballot races to vote on them. So it might be fraud, or it might have something to do with this other explanation.
For instance, you don't find it in California or in Alabama, in states that are decided. Like, let me be specific here. In the state, and let me compare, by the way, that the same phenomenon didn't happen for Trump. In other words, you did not have Trump-only voters. Like in the state of Georgia.
So wait,
Trump,
so we had 500,000 only Biden on the entire ballot. 500,000 just.
Okay, so you don't have the high ballot roll-off for Trump because the Trump campaign did not push early voting, and so get a bunch of casual voters, nearly as much as the Biden campaign, just casting a vote for the president and ignoring down ballot votes.
In Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin?
No, they were. No, I want to be careful here. They were not only in those states, but I'm saying a far higher propensity. To
I see. Okay.
Yeah, no, that number I gave you is nationwide. But like to point out the difference here, because I think this is critical. For example, in Georgia, Trump, and then they actually had two Senate races. So that the Senate Republicans and Trump, the differential there was only 818 votes. I mean, just nothing, right? In a place where you had, I think, 5 million total votes in Georgia, 800 votes. That was the only the amount of Trump-only votes. Okay, Biden-only votes versus the Democrat Senate candidates, 95,000 in Biden's favor.
This is a fact. So
this is a fact.
Where can I see this on the internet? Do you know?
Yeah. So I will post it. I will post it on my when we get off the phone. I will post it on my.
Yes, I'd like to put it. I'd like to put it into my column, which has to go in today. So, okay. A personal request that you do that. That is a very powerful figure. Statistic.
And Dennis, to put that in context,
really.
As I said, 95,000 of them plus Biden. Biden only in the state of Georgia. Let's look at the state of Wyoming, which had a Senate race. Obviously, a much smaller state, but the point is, it's an established state, right? Everybody knows it's red, and that they're going to win. Biden's his Biden only surplus there, 725 votes, minuscule. Like it just didn't happen, right?
Yes, I saw Rod Blagojevich, the former governor. Where was he a governor? Was it Illinois? Who said that Democrats have been cheating for decades. Right. That sounds amazing, but he doesn't provide any substantiation. That's called hearsay. All right. So you could have anyone come along and say anything. Yes, he's a former governor and he was pardoned by Donald Trump, so maybe he's doing Donald Trump a solid. But just saying that Democrats have been cheating for decades, that's not terribly persuasive if you're not emotionally involved already. Like if you want to believe that there's massive voter fraud, then you seize on that and go, oh, Rod Blagojevich, he's telling the truth. He'd know. He was a former governor of Illinois, but he didn't provide any substantiation. He provided nothing. So just saying it means nothing. Like I could tell you that I slept with 25 Playboy playmates, right? But no pictures. You're not going to believe me.
Well, it happened. So it happened in other places, but not to any degree. The prevalence of it was in the battleground state. Now, does this alone prove fraud? No, but it is incredibly statistically improbable.
Yeah, and Driss says any competent fraudster would hide their tracks, obviously. Right, so it's hard to prove voter fraud. That's the argument by a lot of these Republican pundits. It's so hard to prove voter fraud, but then allow someone else to do it. If it's too hard for you, guess what's really hard? Playing football, getting smacked in the mouth, getting tackled. That's really hard, really hurts. Studying chemistry or physics for many of us is really hard. There are a lot of things in life that are really hard. If you're not up to it, then don't talk about it. I'm not meaning you, the audience. Obviously, this is an open chat. People come in and talk about anything on their mind. But don't present yourself to the world as some voting fraud expert if you're unable to do the hard work that would substantiate your claims to be a voting fraud expert. If you don't want to do the hard work, don't do the hard work. But then don't pretend that you're some kind of expert. Experts do hard work, right? To be a physicist, to be a chemist, to graduate from a top-tier law school, to win a case in the United States Supreme Court, that requires hard work. To be a certified public accountant requires hard work. To become a medical doctor in the United States requires hard work. So these guys are the equivalent of people claiming to be medical doctors who aren't medical doctors. Like these guys are like the chiropractors of doctors. Like chiropractors call themselves doctors. They're not doctors. They're frauds. Chiropractic at best is useless. And I've gone to Shabbat dinners and everyone around the table introduces themselves by their first name. Who's the one person at a Shabbat dinner who does not introduce himself by his first name? It's the chiropractor. I'm Dr. Cohen.
That this would happen in battleground states to this degree.
Totally.
And it's statistically improbable that many people would decide, I'm voting for Biden and no one else.
Now, are you predicting an Arizona victory?
I am. Now, listen, it's going to be very narrow, but the trends look our way, and our team on the ground tells us that where these remaining votes are coming from, because a lot of people, for instance, they just use Maricopa County, which is a massive county. I mean, in population terms, it's most of Arizona. So where in Maricopa really matters, and we believe that the remaining votes to be counted are primarily from GOP-leaning parts of Maricopa. So, we can't know for sure, but we like the trend. Now, it's not going to be by much. We think it's going to be by a few thousand.
Can you
votes.
explain to me, this has nothing to do with politics, red or blue, but can you explain to me why a supposedly non-third world country takes a week to count ballots?
No, I can't give you a good explanation. The only explanation we have for Arizona, unfortunately, even though I think it's a well-run state on the whole with a good governor, the elections boards, particularly in Maricopa, we think they're slow-walking this on purpose. Again, as I mentioned in the last segment, the more that they can solidify in the public's mind that Biden is the president-elect, right? The more that phrase is repeated, the more that's sort of accepted reality, the more likely they believe it is that they can convince people it is actual reality. So we really believe it. We're very angry about this. That Arizona.
And one of this guy's strong arguments here, Steve Cortez's strong arguments, is that why would more people vote for charismatic Joe Biden than for Barack Obama? Because when people vote, they don't only vote for a candidate, they also vote against a candidate. It is possible that there are a lot of people out there who really hate Donald J. Trump. There may even be more people out there who really hate Donald J. Trump than who loved Barack Obama. So if you really hate Donald J. Trump, you may well get a mail-in ballot and just vote for the presidential candidate who is not Donald J. Trump. It doesn't mean that there's fraud when you have counties where there are more people who vote for Joe Biden than for Barack Obama.
Arizona's taking this long. I mean, think of Florida, far larger state, right? Florida processes votes in 3 hours. I mean, completely. And no one has any concerns about
exactly. That's right. That's exactly right. Or Ohio, for that matter.
Yeah, so states can do it if they want to.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're right, it's outrageous.
It is. No, it's embarrassing as an American, frankly.
Yes.
So I have a sensitive question for you in light of your view on Arizona. What is your take on Fox News calling Arizona at the beginning of the evening?
I think it's reprehensible. Because listen, let's say they end up being right. Let's say that Biden squeaks out Arizona, and it will be by a nose. Okay, let's say he happens. The fact that they called it that early, they called it before they called Florida, which we won by 377,000 votes. Right? The fact that they did that tells me one thing only: they were trying to put their thumb on the scale. They were trying to create a narrative for that night. And if you notice, it really changed from that moment on. We stayed up all night here, of course, at campaign headquarters. Momentum started changing, and then we started getting these batches, falling into the battleground stage of overwhelmingly Biden votes. So we really believe that was a PR propaganda effort to try to protect some cover to what was going to happen that night. Now, I know I sound very conspiratorial by that, but tennis, I don't know another explanation. Why else would you call a state that is that close, that early in the ballgame when you are not calling Florida?
Right. If you're at all sympathetic to this point of view, you're going to find this guy incredibly persuasive. I mean, doesn't he sound powerful? Doesn't he sound like he's speaking for God and goodness and righteousness?
Place that we won.
Okay, so final question. Is that indicative of something happening at Fox News?
I believe so, but I did used to work there. I have a lot of friends there. I'm not on the inside now, so I don't know, but it sure smells bad, doesn't it? It's kind of like these Biden-only votes. It doesn't prove anything about Fox News, but it sure is problematic to anybody's intuition, right?
We've got to talk later this week. Steve Cortes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, everybody, Dennis Prager here. Everybody, this has never happened before, that a tremendous percentage of Americans believe that a presidential election has been fraudulently recorded. It's not comparable to the way Democrats viewed the Al Gore defeat. They believe that there was, I don't, but I understand. They believe that politics in the Supreme Court enabled George W. Bush to win. Politics in the Supreme Court is not the same as voter fraud. They do not believe votes were counted fraudulently in a whole bunch of states. And what Steve Cortes just mentioned to me about the staggering number of unprecedented votes for just the presidential candidate. The Biden-only votes overwhelmingly in the divided states, the battleground states.
Am I saying that those making the case for Trump are grifting? I'm saying that some of them are not impressive, that some of them are charlatans who sound incredibly persuasive, but they're still charlatans. Now, there may be members of an A-team out there who I haven't gotten to read or haven't gotten to listen to. I just wish the Republicans making the case for Trump and making the case for massive voter fraud this time around were more impressive. I wish that they weren't incompetent. I wish that they don't understand basic matters of electoral turnout and how voting works. I just wish they were more impressive. Surely we can offer better than these incompetents. Surely.
That's compelling. It's not dispositive, but it is compelling. I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal on how there's a district, what is it, in Arizona, where it's largely Latino, or as the left would put it, Latinx. Isn't that a joke? Do they say Filipinx? Huh? Why not? Think about it. Do you understand they're not only vicious, the left, the idiocies they come up with, they could say anything. They could say Latinja, and then we would say Latinja. And the New York Times the next day would capitalize Latinja. Latinx. Is that beyond belief? The moment I see that in an article, I know that the writer is intellectually a fraud. For decades, no Democratic presidential candidate had won Starr County, this is Texas, with less than a 48-point margin. Local law is that the last Republican who came close to winning a partisan race was a sheriff's candidate gunned down in a saloon in 1907. Yet last week, Starr County residents, 8,224, voted for President Trump in a red wave that moved this county from Hillary Clinton's 60-point margin to a 5-point win for Democratic candidate Joe Biden.
Wow, it was a red wave, guys. It was a red wave.
Saying that Democrats who are constantly screaming about voter intimidation, voter disenfranchisement, are now not wanting to look at anything when it comes to maybe the possibility that there were some problems in an election where the rules were changed halfway through an election. We had mass mail-in voting in places where we've never seen it before. And maybe we should learn from some of the lessons that we've seen here about how to deal with this in future elections.
Greg, I heard you singing so many great points to me.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to turn it over to you.
I just like that Joe Biden is so concerned about Trump's
legacy.
Yeah, after basically calling him a Hitler in his campaign ad and labeling all of his supporters racist. You should really worry about your legacy. One of the things that strikes me is how nervous the Democrats are about moving on. They're like a pair of high school cheerleaders in a bad neighborhood frantically trying to call an Uber. Get me out of here. Sorry, guys. You're on a different time clock right now. And what McConnell says is right. You're going to have to sit and wait this out. I get the feeling that mostly legal is now the mostly peaceful, right? Remember they said that 93% of the protests were mostly peaceful. That left 7%. Well, I hate to tell you, you don't need 7% to throw a national election. You don't even need 2%. You can get like less than 1% in very specific counties. So the idea of them saying like there's no widespread fraud, no one's arguing that. What they're talking about is in specific places, in very specific places.
And the chat says we've got think tanks. We've got the Heritage Foundation. Okay, they've been studying voter fraud for 2 decades. They have people on their payroll who are experts on voter fraud. And in 2 decades, they have come up with approximately 1,600 cases of voter fraud in the United States. 1,600. That's what they've come up with, paying experts to study the matter.
There's something weird going on. And oddly, all those things that are weird went in one direction. None of those things helped Trump. They all miraculously, coincidentally, went in the direction to help Joe. I saw a lot of people online comparing the Republican response to Stacey Abrams losing, to how I didn't care, nobody cared. There's a difference between the close race with Stacey Abrams losing and what's happening now. For 4 years, Stacey Abrams wasn't painted as a Nazi, okay? There was no moral imperative to cheat. When you call somebody a Nazi, there is a moral imperative that says under all circumstances, you can try to unseat that person. Okay, that wasn't there. Number 2, Republicans are less likely to cheat because they know the media is not going to cover for them, right? But the Democrats know that because they're all on the same side. And number 3, with Stacey Abrams, there was only one data point, her in Georgia. You got Arizona, you got Pennsylvania, you got Wisconsin, and you got Georgia in here. And again, all of the weirdness went in one direction. So I think I have proved that this election is fraudulent. Thank you, America.
All right, Juan Williams, let's get your take on this.
Well, I guess when you don't have the facts,
There's a pitcher out there, Juan, and he's throwing some filthy stuff. And we haven't seen a pitcher like this throw stuff like this. Balls moving all over the plate. All we want to know, let's check his glove. Let's check his belt buckle. Let's check his hat. If everything checks out, he's good to go. That's all we want. How about this? Car swerving all over the road. Officer pulls up. An odor of alcohol emanating from the driver's seat. I'd like to step out of the car, sir, maybe do a field sobriety test, maybe even blow the breathalyzer. If he blows under, let him go. But you guys are refusing to blow. You're even refusing to step out of the car. You're resisting arrest. It's like the IRS. You see some suspicious transactions, kind of like when the Moscow lady sent a couple million to Hunter. It throws a red flag up. Routine audit. Open the books. Let's check it out. That's how it works. You don't need evidence right away. You just need the allegation, and you haven't been watching. They have multiple signed, sworn affidavits from poll workers in Wayne County, Clark County, saying they witnessed the fraud. They witnessed the backdating of the ballots. They witnessed suspicious ballot dumping, harvesting of dead people. That's on the book, so let's just look at it. And I bet after we look at it, there's more evidence of fraud than there was of collusion, and that was...
I've never said that election mischief is rare. I've said that proof for it is rare. Now, it may be substantial, and pathetic Republicans have never been willing to do the hard work to uncover it. So, also, there are many degrees of mischief. So, is ballot harvesting in all cases, is that mischief? Is it highly susceptible to mischief? Is it more susceptible to mischief than people showing up at the polls? It seems to be more susceptible to mischief than people just showing up at the polls.
Zero.
I think you got nothing.
And if it doesn't happen and we don't see it's enough, I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
I think the American people, you said you wanted to heal. This would help the healing process.
Oh, yeah, this is helping.
It would help the healing process
by
a lot.
blocking transition.
All right, up next, President-elect Joe Biden is planning to undo many of President Trump's policies.
Okay, great. So Patrick Basham of the Democracy Institute, he's talking here with Joseph
They are
Cotto.
very interesting times, obviously, for everyone. No less here at the Democracy Institute. It's an interesting time to be part of this world.
Yes, it is.
And how many employees does the Democracy Institute have? I just wonder.
It gets more interesting, I think, as the hours and days roll along. We're going to be discussing a very interesting article he wrote, which has to do with fraud and polling in the 2020 presidential election.
So I am coming to you live from the headquarters of the Radical Love and Inclusion Institute. I am standing right now in the Relief Factor pain-free studios of the Radical Love and Inclusion Institute.
And the title of the article is very, leaves little to the imagination. Stalin said it's not important who votes, but how they are counted. And that is quite true, to say the absolute least. And the byline is Joseph Stalin said it's not important who votes, but how they do the counting. Fast forward to this American election, and the late dictator's wry remark rings eerily true. Before I go any further, I will say that if anyone has any reasonable, responsible questions or comments for Patrick or myself, please do leave them in the live chat as a super chat, and we shall get to them. But please do not leave them all for the end. So Patrick, just right off the bat, talking about your article, very interesting title, very interesting byline. Anything to add about either one?
Well, I thought it might be helpful, slightly entertaining. The risk of offending or alarming my friends on the right of the spectrum, to quote one of the great communist dictators of the last century, we can, just because we disagree on almost everything that, or probably everything that Stalin ever did, doesn't mean that he didn't have wise words to impart from time to time, right? And
if you're going to write an article about widespread voter fraud costing the right victor in the 2020 presidential election the presidency, probably using entertainment or putting a value on entertainment for such an article, not sure it's the best approach.
When it came to the subject of elections and voting, the larger context for that quote that's attributed to him is his discussion. He was discussing Western democracies and how Western democracies can kid themselves, or rather kid their people, that everyone gets a vote, everyone has a free vote, and therefore it's all sunshine and rainbows. And his point was that yes, everyone can have a free vote, but as long as the government, or as long as the most powerful forces in any society get to decide who does the counting and how that counting is done, then the result can be whatever the result needs to be. And I thought that as of Friday morning, when I penned the piece, that was at that time perhaps the best way to, in a nutshell, characterize what we had observed over the previous 3 days here in America.
It was a bizarre turn of events. I think everybody knows what happened, but just to recap, Trump was leading handily in really all the swing states until the middle of the night on the morning after, the early morning hours, the day after Election Day, and then everything just sort of froze. And he came out looking sort of shocked about this. Who wouldn't be? That everything just stopped. And then when it started up again around 4 a.m., the Democratic votes began rushing in. One dump of votes out of Wisconsin, I believe it was Milwaukee County, was 100% in Biden's favor, with like 100,000 votes being reported at the time. I mean, obviously the probabilities of that are the probability of that is.
No, the probability of that is not low. It's exactly what was predicted, that Trump voters were expected to show up on the day of the election, cast their vote. And so that's why the news media, that's why Axios, for example, was talking well in advance of the election that on election night there would be a red mirage, that it would appear on election night that Donald Trump had won an overwhelming victory. And then as the mail-in ballots get counted in the Rust Belt swing states, that would turn the election over to a comfortable Joe Biden win. Now, that is what seems to have occurred. That is what was widely predicted to have occurred. It's not so shocking.
Quite narrow if one wants to talk about how legitimate votes are filtered, and even from an overwhelmingly Democratic area, there'll probably be at least 20% Republican returns. But that's just one example. And then over the ensuing days, more and more of these overwhelmingly Democratic mail ballots, these were mail ballots, kept filtering in, and now it's at the point where Trump narrowly trails in a few key swing states, including Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. I think those are the big four. And he's suing like mad to try to get what he believes are invalid votes knocked out of the count. And that's where we are right now. I think that's where we'll be for some time. Patrick, and before we go deeper into your article. Anything to say about the situation?
Well, it is certainly puzzling, isn't it? I mean, it's a big picture wise. One of the things I find puzzling about a lot of the media reaction, the political reaction to anyone who has dared to suggest that just perhaps this isn't over. That is, there might be something to look at in terms of the voting in a number of states. And of course, just as a matter of fact, the count continues in many, many states. So even if there is no funny business that has gone on and can be documented, although I think that already has been, but even if there wasn't, there is no certified winner in a number of states and therefore no certified winner of the election. But looking at it from the big picture, in thinking about this pushback against anyone who, any group or institution that pushes back against the narrative that Biden has obviously won, I think back, I mean, one could come up with all kinds of examples, but I think back to just 15 years ago, some of your audience may recall the elections in the Ukraine, which caused a great deal of consternation throughout the world, certainly throughout the Western world and throughout the liberal democratic world, properly classically defined, because of the obvious tangible irregularities, abnormalities in the way that vote was conducted and counted. We had all kinds of problems with absentee ballots and the count itself, and just there's a laundry list.
The majority in the
What's
House, which we're seeing
interesting
today,
is,
there are more Republican.
in terms of the connection here, is that at the time, the American ambassador to Kiev and the U.S. government had a huge problem with the authenticity of the official result, and made a great noise, as did many Western governments, and had ultimately some success in that regard. And it's striking how the very laundry list that I've touched on is near identical to the laundry list that Republicans and the Trump campaign have not just outlined, but so far have begun fleshing out regarding these respective swing states and the apparent irregularities and abnormalities. So we have a situation where the American media, I think my memory serves me, perhaps one of your audience members to correct me if I'm wrong, very much and with good reason cheered on the American government and other governments' opposition to what had clearly been a stolen election in Ukraine, as they have done in other parts of the world when there have been documented demonstrable abnormalities and irregularities in the count, and yet is apparently completely uninterested in what appear to be many incidents and instances of the very same problem in their own country, in an arguably more important election, not simply because it's this country, it's the media country, but because America, for good or for ill, remains the most important and influential nation in the world. So I find that puzzling, to say the least, and it begs a number of questions.
It certainly does. What I will say is that I was very skeptical of any fraud taking place on election night, very skeptical indeed, specifically, not in Pennsylvania really, but in Michigan and Wisconsin. But as I've seen, I mentioned the absurd result out of Wisconsin. Now, there are some more issues there with regard to how the election was conducted. They're a little too complicated to get into here, but the state assembly there is looking into it. And the state assembly, by the way, is what's responsible for sending electors to the electoral college in the event that there is no clear result of the election itself from the popular vote in the state. But looking at stuff that I saw, actual people who voted, and I do use quotes when I say people who voted, in Pennsylvania, there were people born in the 1860s that I saw on the state website who were listed as...
Okay, you got to do your research. That's what they use, as I mentioned earlier, when voters don't put a birth date. They just throw in something like 1800 or 1900.
Is that right?
Yeah. I'm going to go look it up.
Fake news. All right. Anyway, so Greg, shouldn't you be mad at Trump for not building the wall he promised and not getting Mexico to pay for it, as opposed to being mad at Biden for saying, let's stop this farce?
I don't know. Maybe you should ask all those Hispanics that voted for Trump. Yeah. Anyway,
wait a minute. 2/3 plus of Hispanics voted against Trump.
Yeah,
he had the highest.
I see.
But I know facts confuse you.
Yeah,
so
apparently you don't know. 2/3, and you want to celebrate a little margin.
No, it wasn't a little. You got to go look at the numbers. I ask you to. Okay. I thought that Biden was supposed to be a centrist. Weren't we being sold on that? Wasn't America sold on that? And yet, I mean, him calling himself a centrist and then bringing back the Paris scam is like calling yourself a vegetarian and eating a McRib sandwich right after. Joe would be an idiot to undo these things because it's going to create job loss, higher taxes, and a recession. And what's that going to do? You're going to open the door for the return of the Mac Daddy. In 2024, it's going to be 2016 all over again. It's going to replay. Exactly. You laugh, but it's that's what happened.
I know it's true.
That's what happened. And so the thing is, he's already going to have folk hero status. And if Biden totally screws the pooch while sniffing its hair, you're going to see Trump come back on fire. And I don't know. I could shut up there, but I had another really good point. He's got to realize he wasn't elected to be a leftist. He was elected because those people who voted for him didn't like Trump. They liked Trump's policies, but they didn't like Trump's personality. So he should just see himself as Trump light. And just like, don't tweet, but just continue the policies. Trust me, that'll work enough for everybody. Nobody wants Greta Thunberg with hair plugs.
I don't think that climate change is such a radical.
And Half Galician says the 5 now has the stank of losers. And let's go to Patrick Basham here talking to Joseph
voted
Cotto.
in September of this year, 1870s as well, 1880s. And then in Michigan, a fellow who died in 1984 voted this year, according to that state's website. And this is barely even the tip of the iceberg. So there's no question there was a lot of wrongdoing going on here. Then in Pennsylvania, the way in which the election was conducted, period, looks to be rather unconstitutional. That's very complicated to explain. But it essentially there's a two-tier system that is not sound under the Constitution, and that's what Trump's team is suing over. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all this plays out. But there are a lot of issues, and I don't think they'll be going away over the next few days. And it'll be interesting to see how people who are so certain that Biden has won react to the outcome of these issues as time rolls along. That's really the media's fault. They have certainly, by rushing to call Biden the president-elect, they have certainly, I think, built up expectations of what actually happened that are not necessarily in alignment with the facts. But for anybody who knows them.
Okay, so press 1 in the chat if you believe that the media would have called the election for Trump if the circumstances had been the same. So that if Trump were in Joe Biden's position now, do you think that they would have called the election for Trump? Or do you think that they would be demanding that the states certify? I believe that the news media would have called the election for Trump if the circumstances were that Trump was in the position that Joe Biden is in now.
The media operates in this country. That should be far from surprising.
Indeed. And I think as someone who believes that it's certainly possible that Trump ends up being certified the winner, whether it's through recounts, lawsuits, state legislatures, or Congress itself. I think it's certainly a possibility that that's the outcome. If that were to be the outcome, we would look back, I think, and say that between election night and whatever day, week, month, year that Trump is certified, that the media perhaps has hung itself with its own rope. By that I mean, obviously there was a strong media narrative that Biden was the inevitable winner from the campaign. States were called bizarrely early for Biden, bizarrely late, if called at all, for Trump. All these things that confirm that narrative that although the outcome was closer than anticipated, it was obviously the way that it was on the side of whom we favored and whom we anticipated would win the election. Then, given that Biden has quote unquote won, and there is apparently no doubt about that, then why would the media be so hesitant to take on board even the question about fraud, or more to the point, just a question of auditing the various counts and that sort of thing? Because if you know, as the media does, that Biden has won fair and square, and apparently...
Well, to be fair to the news media, we are in an unprecedented situation where the standing president is refusing to accept the results of an election. We've never before had a president of the United States or a candidate for the presidency of the United States refuse to accept the results of an election. So this is an unprecedented guy in Donald Trump, and this is an unprecedented situation. And we've never before had a large section of the American public believe that the election was stolen from them by widespread voter fraud. Now, the Democrats in year 2000 believed that the election was stolen from them by political maneuvering on the part of the United States Supreme Court. Now we're in a situation where I would assume many, if not most, Republicans believe that the 2020 election was stolen from the rightful winner, Donald Trump, by massive voter fraud.
Apparently, it's so blindingly obvious that they can proclaim him and talk about him as president-elect, and anyone who raises an eyebrow over that is simply dismissed as a lunatic. If you can do that because you have so much evidence on your side, then what harm in waiting a number of days or weeks for this recount audit type process to play out, for these lawsuits to play out? Because plainly, from the media's knowledgeable position, these lawsuits have no merit because they've declared there's no fraud, not at all, neither widespread nor significant. We know that Biden won by healthy margins because they told us so. So why not let that play out? Then when Biden is certified as the just winner by every accounting metric and process, then that would both give Biden's win more legitimacy. A lot of people on the Trump side would have to say, boy, are we mad, are we frustrated, we lost, but we lost fair and square. And it would also, as we're all most concerned about our own self-interest, the media, which
have all the states certified the vote? No, none of the states have certified the vote.
Isn't exactly, riding a wave of high, solid reputation in the public eye. Wouldn't it then give them a little bit of a boost because they played it really even and fair and balanced and just told the truth? But they've gotten out ahead of themselves. And if it turns out it's as they say, well, good for them. It's too bad it didn't work out that way with their polls, but maybe this time it will work out. But if it doesn't, it seems an unnecessary own goal, an unnecessary self-inflicted black eye. I mean, maybe I'm missing something.
I don't think that you are. There is something for us in the live chat. Just a reminder, everyone, if you have a reasonable, responsible question for Patrick or myself, please do leave it in the live chat. It's a super chat.
And whatever happened to Russian interference? So all this talk about Russian interference wasn't about Russian interference. It was a tactic that the Democrats use to delegitimize the Trump presidency. So let's imagine that all these allegations of voter fraud, let's imagine that they're false, but let's also imagine it's possible that they are false in the sense that voter fraud may not be sufficient to swing the 2020 election to Donald Trump, but it may very well be an effective tactic to use against the Democrats, just like the Russia collusion hoax narrative was an effective tactic by Democrats to delegitimize Donald Trump and to distract Donald Trump. So why not turnabout, be fair play? Republicans used voter fraud allegations to delegitimize the Biden administration and to distract the Biden administration and to put it on the back foot. So even if there isn't sufficient validity to these accusations of voter fraud, may very well be an effective political tactic.
Chat, we will get to it, but leave it as soon as you can. Please don't leave it all for the end. Thank you very much in advance. From Armen to Lee, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Which state do you think we will have the best chance of flipping, either through litigation or action by the state legislature? I think that Trump's campaign is looking not necessarily to flip. I think they are. I mean, they hope to flip states, no question. But I don't know that that is their form. That's what they think is the most likely outcome. I think they're just stalling the certification of results with a flood of lawsuits. That seems to be their strategy, and that is the most direct path to victory for them, in my opinion. I think that Georgia would be quite likely to flip through, whether it be an audit, recount, and of course lawsuits. I think also that Pennsylvania would be pretty much the same deal. That I think I've done the Supreme Court, but I think Pennsylvania would be in the same boat. But once again, I don't know that Trump's goal is actually flip states. It could be, and I'm sure that he hopes to do so. I'm not saying he's giving a hope on that, but I think he just wants to stall certification of these results. So this goes to various legislatures. That I think is his real goal here. Patrick, anything to say about what Armen brought up?
Yeah, if we're talking about flipping based on recounts or audits, then I think, then Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, I think is where you're looking, simply because the margins are comparatively small. I mean, Arizona, before there's a recount, may.
Okay, so if you're convinced that there's widespread illegal immigrants voting in the United States, do you understand how highly, highly, highly self-destructive and irrational that would be for them? So illegal immigrants do not want to draw attention to themselves from law enforcement. So let's say Jose, illegal immigrant from Mexico, chooses to vote illegally in a California election. So what's the upside? The upside is he gets to cast one vote in whatever direction he wants, which is virtually an irrational act. One vote is not going to change anything. What's the downside? He gets deported. It's a felony. He gets sent to prison for 5-10 years. He gets a big fine. So for individuals to knowingly commit voter fraud is highly, highly self-destructive and irrational. Now, I believe that there are ways to tamper with an election. I don't think the argument that illegals consciously voting illegally or just people here legally but still voting illegally, I just don't see that as a mechanism because the odds are so weighted against you. What do you get? You get to cast one illegal vote. What does one vote do? Bupkis. What's the downside? You become a convicted felon. You go to prison for 5 to 10 years. You have a fine. You get humiliated and you get stuck into an awful legal process that may very well result in you getting anally raped in jail. So, no, I don't think individuals choosing to vote illegally is a widespread problem in the United States. There may very well be voter fraud. I don't think that is the mechanism. It just does not make sense. Why would anyone risk prison, risk anal rape in prison, risk a large fine, risk public humiliation when the highest upside for your illegal vote is you get to cast one vote in whatever direction you want. One vote never changes anything.
Quote unquote flip to Trump, although it was never Biden's actually to begin with. I mean, Arizona's obviously going to be quite close one way or the other. Nevada is a dodgier one for Trump because of the, how do I put this diplomatically, the nature of the political environment in Nevada and the way the things have been set up for this election. But the margins are narrow, and Georgia has somehow, at the moment, found itself in the Biden sort of net category. But there's so much dispute over military ballots and all of this. That also might go to Trump before there's a recount. Of course, there's likely to be a recount regardless of the outcome in any of these states. I think it has to be litigation or through the state legislatures for Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, or litigation. Yes, it depends how we can debate how far it goes up the judicial food chain. But I say that because the margins are I mean, in the tens of thousands, depending on which state you're referring to.
And non-citizens who have legal driver's licenses, if they vote, they are not doing it legally. They're doing it illegally, and they face felony prosecution, jail, huge fine, and getting deported. So it just doesn't make any sense that individuals would knowingly, consciously vote illegally, because there's only a tiny, tiny, tiny upside. You get to cast one vote. And then the downside is become a convicted felon, spend time in prison, get raped and fined and humiliated.
Which is a lot to turn around solely on the basis of throwing out individual ballots for individual ballots. And it appears, my sources first and second hand in those states tell me that there are historically large number of those sorts of this one is wrong, that one is wrong type of ballots, but it's still a lot. And one of the problems you have, I think in a state like Pennsylvania, is that the illegal invalid ballot.
And the chat says, Luke, name one time when that happened to someone voting illegally in the United States. That's my whole point. It's so overwhelmingly rationally against a person's self-interest to vote illegally that even the Heritage Foundation, which has studied this topic for 20 years, is only able to come up with a sum total of approximately 1,600 examples of individual voter fraud. So it's very rare because the incentives are so against the individual knowingly voting illegally. Now, I'm sure that there are other ways to monkey with an election system. There are other ways to commit voter fraud. If you can do it through software, if there are other ways to create ballots that don't link to known individuals facing felony prosecution, okay, that could make rational sense. But for an individual to knowingly vote illegally, facing prosecution for a felony, that makes no sense.
Ballots are, by design, now in the pot. They're in the mix. So it's probably impossible, again, probably by design, to find them individually and take them out, which means that the only hope from Trump campaign's point of view is to litigate this successfully so that large numbers, a sufficient hundreds of thousands of votes, are deemed tainted, and therefore everything.
And Lip says, well, nobody commits murder because of the risk of punishment. Well, look at the upside of murder. You get to end someone's life. There is no comparison to the upside for someone who wants to commit murder and the upside for someone who wants to vote illegally. You get to cast one vote when you vote illegally. You get to cast one vote for Joe Biden. That's bupkis. It's nothing. There's no upside for the individual to consciously vote illegally. What does he get out of it? He gets to cast one vote. Now, if there was a way that he could get to cast 500 votes that might count, then you've got a stronger case.
It came in after 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, or some such yardstick is the one, and therefore it transforms the outcome in that state because it so overwhelms Biden's lead. So it's a great question to which I haven't given a great answer, but I've attempted to talk long enough to make it sound like I know that what may happen in those respective states, right? I think we can divide it that way between litigation and potential recount flips.
Mm. Yeah, there are a lot of avenues he can pursue. He just has to keep the clock running in order to pursue them. That's the big deal there. From Ozzy Mandius, republics die because they create good times, which breed morally weak men, and republics are too cautious in terms of power, call the morally weak. There's certainly a grain of truth there. Of course, it depends on one's definition of morality as well.
And guess what happens when you increase incentives? What happens when you increase welfare? More people go on welfare. What happens when you increase welfare payments for people who have children? More people have children. What happens when you decrease welfare payments when you have children? Fewer people have children. What happens when you increase penalties for crime? Fewer people commit crimes. So even 80 IQ people respond to incentives. They may not respond to incentives in as rational manner as a 130 IQ person. The average IQ of a person in prison is around 90, but it still affects their choices.
But there's a lot of truth that republics destroy themselves if they do well, or monarchies as well. Any kind of, one might say, large political entity destroys itself because it creates good times, and that makes the people sort of weak-stomached, so to speak, and they're unable to preserve the society which their forefathers created as a result of that. So I think there's definitely more than a pearl of wisdom in Ozzy's statement. Patrick?
Yeah, Driss is right. Illegals, by and large, don't care about American politics. People in the United States illegally don't want to come to the attention of law enforcement. the last thing that they could be expected to do is to flock to the election office, to start stuffing their ballots in, mailing their ballots in, showing up to vote. It would be highly irrational for anyone to do that if they're in the United States illegally.
Anything to say about what Ozzy brought up?
And we have no evidence of this going on widespread.
Yeah, I mean, the question, it touches on something that the late great economist Joseph Schumpeter, the Nobel laureate, if memory serves, he wrote and thought a lot about this, and he predicted. Those of your viewers old enough to remember the late 80s and early 90s, we had the first great wave, or successful wave politically, of environmentalism, right? That's carried to this day, and many learned people at the time pointed to the likes of Schumpeter's work to note that, as you were touching on, Joseph, that capitalism can be too successful for its own good. And it is so successful that enough people are so above their basic needs that they have the luxury, they have the time, the energy, and the resources to sit around and think about what other problems might be out there that their parents and forefathers and ancestors never had the time or means to consider. And so whether the planet will last another 1,000 years is one of the questions that popped into a number of wealthy people's heads in the late.
Okay, so the chat is convinced that illegal immigrants don't think ahead, that they don't care about penalties, that they don't care about consequences, that they don't respond to incentives because they're too stupid. Well, what do Mexican drug traffickers do? What's their number one policy? We sell to white people, we don't sell to black people. That's widespread among Mexican drug traffickers in the United States. They don't want to mix, deal, sell to, buy from black people because they don't want potential violence and blowback. So they seem to respond to incentives in a fairly rational manner there. So people selling black tar heroin are overwhelmingly Mexican immigrants in the United States. And overwhelmingly, it's the policy. We sell to white people, we don't sell to black people. Now, I think William Barr and the Justice Department should prosecute these Mexican drug dealing gangs in the United States for not selling to black people, just as we need to prosecute prostitutes. Why do so many prostitutes, some of them with a very low IQ, and yet they have this policy that they don't service black men? I mean, it's outrageous. It's so racist. To me, this is the next great civil rights issue, that prostitutes should be forced to not racially discriminate with regard to their customers. And yet even 80 IQ prostitutes frequently refuse to give blowjobs, let alone other sexual acts, to black men. It's outrageous. It's racist. But for some reason, some crazy reason, like even these 80 IQ prostitutes have been banged by 178 dudes, right? They fear that they're more likely to suffer violence, that they're more likely to get an STD, that they're more likely to get physically hurt if they service black men. Now, I'm outraged on behalf of black men that this country permits prostitutes and drug dealers to discriminate against black people and not to service black people as eagerly and willingly as white people. Like, is there something wrong with the money that black people are willing to pay for these services? It's time that the Justice Department start prosecuting hookers and drug dealers for racial discrimination. Like, why are hookers and drug dealers, like 80 IQ hookers and drug dealers, making these rational calculations that they think in their crazy racist way that if they deal with a certain subset of the population, that they'll be more likely to be a victim of violence or of sexually transmitted diseases or other nasty outcomes. It's crazy. Like, why on earth would these dim bulb prostitutes and drug dealers think this way, think in such racist terms? It's crazy. Can you imagine that there are all these immigrants to America who think that that nature has color-coded people for our advantage and that we can make all sorts of suppositions just based on skin color? It's outrageous. Rodney Martin, what's going on, man?
Well, Luke, I want to echo your previous comments about this serious civil rights issue and public accommodation issue with regard to prostitution. I mean, remember, one of the most appalling photographs that we see posted today by white liberals are the signs that say whites only. And yet we routinely see these virtual signs on these ad solicitations for for escort services, which we know what that means. And essentially, when we see no black men, that's essentially a whites only sign from the Jim Crow era. So I want to echo your concern and your grievance, and I think the Justice Department and all of these liberal states, the Attorney General of California, needs to start charging these escorts and prostitutes under civil rights statutes for violations of civil rights, and start making them keep a pro rata quota of minority clientele.
Absolutely. That's something we completely 100% agree on, Rodney.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about this. If a cake shop has to be forced to bake a cake, I think a hooker should have to be forced to engage in 69 with a
absolutely.
With person of color. I agree with you. Absolutely.
Like, can you imagine the pain of these underserved minority customers? They can't even get any Mexican black tar. They can't even get a blowjob from some hooker that 300 guys have run a train on. Can you imagine what this does to their self-esteem?
Well, I think we can clearly blame rape on these hookers' bigotry and racism. Clearly, because they're not providing public accommodation.
It's disparate impact.
Yes,
makes me sick. Sorry.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
I just get so worked up on this topic. Like, I feel so badly.
I think it makes me want to go out and march in the streets without a mask, and chant some obscenities.
Okay, what's going on with our election, Rodney?
Well, I'm happy. I just sent you via Twitter another 2018 Democrat, Harley Ruda, who beat Dana Rohrabacher in 2018. He conceded. He fell. So that's a one-termer, 2-year wonder. So the Republicans picked up another House seat. We're seeing several of those 2018 Democratic gains, Luke, have now fallen after just 2 years. And this goes to that conference call, that very heated conference call that we all heard about in the media, where these Democrats were attacking AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and of course Nancy Pelosi for sanctioning all of this very extreme positioning by the Democratic Party, which I call the Democrats' realignment. So it's going to be interesting to see how many more, because there are still about 3 more seats that are likely to go flip back to the Republicans. So we could see a House of Representatives that is virtually stalemated when you factor what's left of the moderate Democrats that are completely pissed off within the party. We see that schism, that fissure starting to break wide open. Joe Manchin on the Senate side went out, yesterday, I believe, and announced that he is not going to support court packing, that he is not going to support getting rid of the filibuster. That puts him in lockstep then with the GOP, if the GOP has a slimmer majority. And the North Carolina race was just called within the last hour. That puts the Republicans up. I think we kind of knew that's where that was going to go. And I think what's going to do it in Georgia is Georgia has a history of these runoffs, by the way, where now they've never had 2 before, but this time I don't think that matters. What's happened in Georgia when they've had a Senate seat, they have, that'll be forced to a runoff in a presidential election, Luke. And then what happens is the Republican always wins come January, because you have the other Republicans that were in that jungle primary are not running. It's clearly a Democrat versus Republican race, and the Democrats are kind of demobilized. And the only thing that may change that is if the scenario that I have consistently outlined, and that is if Trump is put back, is retained in the White House via state legislatures picking the electors, that will serve to galvanize the Democratic electorate in Georgia, and that might be a problem. But I still don't think it'll be a problem, because I just don't think the Democrats have the firepower in Georgia to carry 2 Senate seats.
And how do you think Trump's legal challenges? How do you see them coming along? So, he's going up in the betting odds. So he was at 5 cents like 3 days ago. He was at 14 cents yesterday. Now he's up to 16 cents. So he's climbing in the betting odds.
Well, and what's interesting, Luke, is first of all, I sent you copies of the actual Pennsylvania case, which is a strong case. And by the way, the Republicans, and I've mentioned this on the show before, they're not arguing widespread, and they shouldn't argue widespread. They should be arguing, and you've seen kind of a realignment of the Republican argument. They're alleging procedural and legal defects in the processing and handling of these ballots that render ballots either invalid or the procedures allowed invalid ballots to be included in the count, which will have a material impact on the election. That is what they're arguing. They're arguing that in Clark County. They're arguing that in Arizona. They're arguing that in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, Trump doesn't need all of those states. Where I think he has the strongest cases is Clark County, Nevada, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, especially Pennsylvania, because they just administratively changed election law that their own constitution says has to be changed by the legislature. And and they also, it required, already the Supreme Court's weighed in, it required Justice Alito to issue an order saying to go back and segregate those ballots, which they weren't doing. So, but beyond all of that, we're now seeing more and more conversation in the media now, Luke, and we're seeing it among even public officials of high rank discuss the involvement of state legislatures to settle this matter because the process is so irrevocably contaminated or broken, or in the proper term would be irrevocably disputed. And we're seeing more and more discussion. Bill Kristol, for instance, tweeted about it, saying that he was more concerned now than he previously was. Of course, he condemned the action, Mr. Never Trumper. But we're seeing more and more people, seeing this trend. Of course, early on, my prediction to you was over a week ago was Trump didn't need any legal victories. He just needed to show that there was sufficient enough dispute that it would, the dispute just couldn't be solved. And that would that would provide sufficient standing for the legislatures to come in and say, we're going to pick the electors because it's not at all clear. So the fact that that process is gaining momentum, and even Democrats are worried about the Pennsylvania litigation. The pleading is 120 pages. It has some very powerful exhibits as evidence, as does the Clark County. We talked about this yesterday, Luke. We all get involved in the political banter and in the heat of the moment. That's fine. But when push comes to shove, when you're engaged in litigation, it has to be based on the merits and on the evidence, and that the pleading is strong. The pleading in Nevada is strong and has merits. They're not going to just be able to dismiss it on an early motion, as does the pleading in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And Arizona. Those four are in terms of litigation. Those are the ones to watch. Those are the ones that probably have the strongest likelihood that would enable those four, state legislatures to act. And of those four, you only need three because Nevada is a split legislature. So you just need Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to act.
Okay, awesome.
Also, Georgia, both the governor, I think it was the governor of Georgia, and the state elections officer said that they are and will find illegal ballots. They made that as a public pronouncement yesterday. I'm not making that up. You can go on YouTube and get their press conference.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't think from this point forward, Luke, and I'll just close on this, supporters of Trump, we don't need to bloviate and engage in emotionally charged oversimplifications. I think we should stand on the information contained in those 4 complaints, and then let the process flow, and at the same time advocate for the state legislatures to intervene as they did in Florida and settle this nonsense.
Okay, Rodney, thanks for calling in, man.
Okay, take care. Have a good afternoon, Luke.
Take care.
In the 20th century. So I think there is some of that. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know the answer, but maybe it plays into how the parties are realigning. You know, you have both pre-Biden and now with Biden. You have a Democratic Party that is very much the party of the wealthy, of the elites, whereas you have a Republican Party, at least under Donald Trump, that's increasingly a party of the working class and increasingly a party of minorities. And for example, of not just the working class, but of what in the old days we call trade union members, right? The labor, not the labor movement, then the labor membership. And that perhaps speaks to the priorities. And something that you and I have touched on over the summer when talking about the electoral impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all of that, is we've had a situation, and I think it was reflected in the voting last week, where those most concerned about the pandemic, who sort of accepted or agreed with Biden's line that we should all remain indoors, masked, and just minimal lifestyle until either a vaccine is found or some therapeutics are able us to go outside safely again, versus those who either had no option but to, or wanted to go back to work and the kids back to school. And what you find is, in addition to the fact that the former group is overwhelmingly pro-democratic and the latter group overwhelmingly pro-republican, or should I say Biden vis-a-vis pro-Trump, is that the former group is overwhelmingly better off, overwhelmingly with a secure paycheck, either from a government entity or because they corporate positions, work from home, and they're white-collar workers who could telework, et cetera, and Zoom their way through their regular monthly checks, were disproportionately those who were always working, most of the quote-unquote essential workers, and those who need to get back to work, and those who are actually affected economically by the lockdowns, where the lockdowns are more than just a nuisance. And what do I do with these kids all day long? But rather actually threatened their families' livelihoods. Those folks generally didn't have a steady, guaranteed paycheck, and they had an hourly paycheck, or they drove trucks or whatever it might be. And so their basic needs over the last 6, 7, 8 months have been either not met, or it's been a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month thing. And you have a very different mindset.
Okay, so about 15 years ago, I interviewed a Jewish prostitute. She operated a website, jewishandadorable.com, where she described herself. Leah is athletic in build. She is definitely the complete package. You will be pleasantly surprised by her elegance, grace, and beauty. Leah has an exceptional style of her own private and serene environment. So I conducted this interview June 6, 2005. I asked her, why do you advertise the Jewish angle? And she says, because I can. It goes over well. I am Jewish and I am adorable, and I attract what I am. I attract safe and upscale people, and I've been using it for a while. So is it important to a lot of men to be with a Jewish girl? Absolutely. There are a lot of Jewish girls in this business, just a lot of them won't admit it. I put it out there, and it is a fabulous marketing tool for me. I've had hobbyists email me, men who like to book prostitutes, and hobbyists email me and say I shouldn't put that out there, take that down, and they get angry. I don't listen to them because I know it works for me. How long have you been doing this? About 10 years. I was working as a massage therapist. I was massaging a 5'11" Jewish girl with short blonde hair, overweight. I said to her, what do you do? She said, I'm a hooker. I was shocked. She said she made $10,000 a month. And she said, you should think about doing this. And I said, no, I could never do that. I'm a nice Jewish girl. I just like gifts. She said, that's funny. You'll never get them. You're better off doing it this way. Then you'll get more gifts. She said, here's my number if you change your mind. So I worked as a cocktail waitress at the Marriott. It was hard. I could barely support myself. The bartender, a gay guy, said, Saturday is Leah's busy night off. I quit. I was slaving 10 hours a day, and I couldn't get out for my auditions. And the guy was accusing me of working, and I've never done that in my life. I quit. I didn't know what to do, so I called the fat Jewish girl. Said, Carol, this is Leah. I just quit my job. I don't know what to do. I'm really upset. She said, put on some lingerie, and I'll send someone over in 30 minutes. I go, what do I do? She said, just smile and be nice. So I answered the door. It was a Jewish guy. He said, pulling on my lingerie, doesn't this come off? And I said, she didn't tell me that it does. He said, yeah, it comes off. I said, oh, okay. So away that went. She sent me more, and that's how I got started. I became very friendly with my clients. They've become my friends. I go out to dinner with them. I do plan on getting married to someone who is Jewish and adorable. That's another reason I put it out there. Yeah, a lot of prostitutes get married. Keeps me safe knowing that I'm dealing with the same tribe. I don't want to lie to somebody. I want them to know that I am trained. I met another girl who married her client. They've been married for 15 years. That's how they met. That's why I'm putting it out there. I've met some great people who aren't Jewish, who I still see as well. This has been the most exciting, vibrant time of my life. I'm also in the music business. I play piano around town. Have you had a client who you knew previously? Yeah, they've come to the door. It's extremely embarrassing. I knew them socially at one of the big private clubs. I'm a native of California for 36 years. They came in. I said, you don't have to stay. They said, no, you're adorable. Then I see them outside when I'm shopping or at a restaurant, and I just put my head down and keep walking. Yeah, so if I have any prostitutes watching the show, what's it like when you run into your clients when you're shopping or at a restaurant? I had a famous voice coach who didn't understand why I was so sexy. This voice coach was also a cantor at a major Jewish synagogue in Los Angeles. He was wondering why I was vibrating all this sex. He decided to go looking through the paper and he found me. Then he started stalking me for about 4 years. So I immediately knew who she was talking about. And Leah goes, oh God, you're good. Yes, he gave me a hard time for 4 years. I was really scared. He was whacked out. He was always spying on me and showing up in different places dressed as different people. He was a mean, angry son of a bitch. He would keep teaching me, but he was short and he was cold. So I guess he was teaching her singing lessons. He kept taking my money. He'd say, come here, come close to the piano and try to cop a feel. When I would attend Friday night service, so this cantor's leading Friday night service, he stopped me dead in his tracks and looked at me like, you can't be here. And I looked back at him with my eyes and gave him a look that, like, God allows anyone in his house, and I stayed for the service. I will walk into any temple I want. I had to go to a psychologist. Thought I was losing my mind. Have you had any rabbis as clients? Yes, one who had a synagogue on Pico Boulevard. He looked like Santa Claus. He answered my ad and he came over. He was a very nice man. I introduced him to my friend and then he died. The three of us did a double. She would see him if I wasn't available. A couple of years later, I asked her, how's the rabbi? She said he died. She probably gave him a heart attack. We had threesomes all the time. He felt uncomfortable wearing a yarmulke. Do you notice any differences between Jewish and Gentile clients? More Jewish men are cheap. Jewish men are always trying to bargain you down. There was a cantor, a Holocaust survivor, real dingleberry. She owned a storefront shul. She made me a vice president. She recruited me to bring in men so they would join and give tzedakah, charity. We'd have Shabbos with all these millionaire men I'd recruit. I saw her at Beth Jacob a couple of years ago. She was wearing this leopard skin dress. She chased me around. Come sit in my car. I want you to hear what I made. I heard one song. I said, okay, great. I just want to get away. What do you love and hate about your job? I love being a compassionate caregiver. I love that I'm able to give my special gift. I don't have guilt. I pay taxes. I'm doing an honor for these people who have had bad marriages and men who don't have time to date. I give a good service. I am a lot of fun. I did not see this woman in person, but from the pictures on her website, and those are always accurate, right? She was attractive. I have a closed practice. Look, this was a classy hooker, guys. And I have a closed practice. The only thing is seeing new people. It's nerve-wracking. Yeah, just put yourself into her shoes. Think how nerve-wracking it is when you have new clients. I screen well. I'm a doctor. I'm a therapist. A lot of it is talking, companionship more than sex. I highly recommend that you Jewish men marry a working girl. We are already trained. We will bring you home women. We will go to swing parties together. Men, God love you all, but most men are pigs. And the moment I learned that, I loved them even more. I said, now I get it. This rabbi counselor, he's a psychologist. He said, 4 sessions is a minimum. So she went to him for counseling. And so apparently he ripped her off. I saw him in the pool swimming. I said to him, what you did to me was so unkosher that I've not forgotten. He apologized. When I went to the high holiday services one day, he came all the way to where I was sitting and gave me a hug. I gave money to rabbis at Esha Torah, and they won't speak to me again. About 5 years ago, I gave $500 to one rabbi. His family couldn't eat. I work hard for my money. Then he wouldn't talk to me after that. I feel like I have a gift from Hashem that I'm able to do this. I want to help. The wife was really nice to me. She's a beautiful person. She set me up to different Shabbos tables. She wanted to get me involved. I felt really comfortable at Esha Torah. I told this story to someone, and they said he knew it was dirty money. Did you go to Esha Torah much? Yeah. I almost became Orthodox 5 years ago. I was raised conservative. My friends are involved. They're Orthodox. I learned more at Esha Torah than when I went to Stephen S. Wise, which Reform Judaism is like treading water. Esha Torah, they were just so patient. I learned so much. I liked going back 3,000 years. I liked washing your hands and saying the bracha. I liked the Saturday lunch. I liked shutting things down. But as soon as they said, once you get married, you can't sing in public again, I had a problem with that. 90% of the clients that see working girls are Jewish. I have friends at Esha Torah that I do Shabbos with. Do they know? They probably have an idea. Do they care? No, because it doesn't take away who I am. I don't flaunt it. Has there been anyone who's refused to take your money because they regard it as dirty money? What do you think? No, they become more friendly with me so they get more money. How many Orthodox clients do you have? A handful. Any differences between Orthodox and non-Orthodox clients? The Orthodox don't shower enough. Uber, what do you want from me? I'm just a nice Jewish girl trying to get ahead. Will I meet somebody this way? Absolutely. If I get murdered after this interview, will you come to my funeral? Yes. Well, it's been nice talking to the LAPD. Shabbat Shalom. So one of the rabbis that she was talking about was a Reform rabbi at Temple Isaiah on Pico Boulevard. He felt a little bashful wearing his yarmulke when he was having a threesome with these two prostitutes, but he was a great rabbi. Rabbi Norman Mirsky, whose idiosyncratic blend of sociology and theology was one of the great delights of the Los Angeles campus of Hebrew Union College. This is from the Jewish Journal in 1998. He died suddenly last week, and any tribute comes too late. At 61, oversized in both girth and wit, he once punned that a Hebrew tongue twister could be called a Jewish tornado. He was never a household name, except among those who attended his beloved minyan at Temple Isaiah in West Los Angeles. His writings, notably a collection of musings and sermons titled Life on the Wire, never got a wide circulation. So good old Rabbi Norman Mirsky. He was a legendary Reform rabbi and scholar in Los Angeles, in West Los Angeles. And wow, what can we say about Rabbi Mirsky? Mirsky's contribution to our understanding of contemporary American Jewish life stands up to those whose scholarly contributions fill pages of bibliography. For Mirsky was among the first to comprehend that the real dynamism in Jewish life, the untapped source of its strength, was to be found along the fringe, the people and the ideas most likely to be cast as marginal Jews, if not pariahs. So this guy, he would reach out to those considered, marginal Jews. And he would reach out to them, even if they were hookers. And he was not afraid to show love to people who society would just throw away. Rabbi Mirsky was concerned with how Jewish religious texts and communal institutions treat women, gays, converts, alcoholics, and addicts, and how they responded to those in need, the ill and the abused. He was the bearer of bad news that an upheaval was at hand. Many conventional thinkers resented him. For too long, Jewish life was in its own state of denial. Need only go back a decade to find evidence of Ozilla and Hannah, Ozzy and Harriet, the limiting self-delusions we Jews proudly taught each other. We had no alcoholics or gamblers, no wife beaters or child molesters. Rabbi Mirsky's message was that these outsiders not only exist, they are us. So let's all dedicate the Torah learning that we're getting on today's show to the memory of Rabbi Norman Mirsky. May his neshama have an aliyah. Wow, what an idiosyncratic blend of sociology and theology. He was the master of outreach, Rabbi Mirsky. Good old Rabbi Mirsky. The guy was a legend. Absolute legend.
Said in that case, whereas those who have been, comparatively speaking, luxuriating in their guaranteed paychecks, it's understandable, and I'm not saying this is a criticism, but it is obviously much easier to sit back, in your recliner in your basement and say, I'm not going outside till there's a vaccine, and no one else should, and I'm going to vote for the guy who agrees with me. It's much easier in that position. Whereas if you're really wondering how you're going to pay the rent and put food on the table, your risk calculus is quite different. So I think the question is, it's a very big picture one, and I've attempted crudely to take us down from 36,000 feet to maybe 5,000 feet, because I do think that there's a lot to that question, as it actually is touched on the tangible realities of this particular election.
Yeah, and there are the realities of this election keep changing at rapid pace. From let me make sure I have the right one. From
Look, I offer private Alexander technique sessions, but don't expect any funny business. Like, what I offer is all very above board. It's all very respectable. I'm a very respectable man. I am a very respectable man. Like, people look up to me as a very respectable man. Jim asks in the chat, Luke, how can Jews claim to be loyal Americans, loyal Australians, loyal French, and at the same time hold Israeli passports? Okay, so how can non-Jews proclaim to be loyal Americans, loyal Australians, loyal French, and hold passports to other countries? It's not really that different. So how can Irish Americans who love Ireland, and let's say they hold a passport to Ireland, but they also love America? How can a man be torn between two lovers? I mean, I've been torn between two lovers, feeling like a fool. Loving both of them is like breaking all the rules. But that's just how I roll. I mean, there are times when a guy has to say what's on his mind, even though he knows how much it's going to hurt. So before I say another word, let me tell you, I love you. Yeah, I'm torn between two lovers, feeling like a fool. Loving both of you is breaking all the rules. Look, you mustn't think you failed me just because there's someone else. You are the first real love I ever had. And all the things I ever said, I swear they are still true. For no one else can have the part of me that I gave to you. I couldn't really blame you if you turned and walked away. But with everything I feel inside, I'm asking you to stay. Because when it comes down to it, I'm torn between two lovers, feeling like a fool. Loving both of you is breaking all the rules.
But I will say quickly, there was a wave of environmentalism, obviously, in the 60s and 70s, but it wasn't quite as big as what came after it. So before somebody brings, that up. Joseph, there was a wave of environmentalism before the 80s and 90s, yeah, but it wasn't quite as big as what came after it.
It didn't reach a sort of political tipping point, a critical mass, I would argue until the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm, definitely. From Christopher Messer, do you think Biden's campaign is panicking? No, I don't think it's panicking. I don't think it's as confident as
And am I a scholar of Christian thought? I might be 1/10 the scholar of Christian thought as Rabbi Norman Mirsky, but I can't touch his scholarship.
It projects itself to be, but I don't think it's panicking either. I think it's sort of in wait and see mode, and it wants to sort of just evaluate the situation as it changes to respond to it in a manner as advantageous as possible for Biden and Harris. Patrick, anything to say about what Christopher brought up?
No, I don't detect any sense of panic. I think there's a lot more anxiety than is being publicly displayed, and that makes sense. I mean, the Biden campaign, the Biden transition team, I keep forgetting my media talking points, they are acting as in their own self-interest. Makes perfect sense. If you have all of the institutions, the major and powerful institutions of the country on your side, and they have collectively, unanimously, and pretty much simultaneously declared your candidate the winner, then you just go along, don't you? You go along in a fairly non-showy way, matter-of-fact sort of way, and you name your pandemic team, and you start thinking about who's going to be in which job, and you take up your, 10,000 square feet of transition space, office space, and all of that. And, you make appropriate mutterings about the other side, really should, get with the program. I think the latest one, just in the last hour or two, Joe Biden, I believe, said that it's embarrassing that Donald Trump, won't concede. But Donald Trump, you see, is following, as any sane political operation would, he's following Hillary Clinton's advice, which of course is don't concede, never concede, right? She hasn't conceded 2016 yet. She advised Joe Biden to never concede this election because obviously if he didn't quote unquote win, it meant that it had been stolen. So Donald, again, we may not agree with everything that Hillary Clinton has ever said or prescribed. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have words of wisdom from time to time.
And from Socrates, good evening, Cotto/Basham. Good evening, Socrates. Great show. Pompeo said there will be a smooth transition into Trump's second term. Perhaps he knows something we don't. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes between Republicans in Washington, Republicans in various state legislatures, so on and so forth. Also, Republicans in the U.S. House are probably communicating with Trump in the White House. And the U.S. House.
Look, I know just how to whisper, and I know just how to cry. I know just where to find the answers, and I know just how to lie. I know just how to fake it, and I know just how to scheme. I know just when to face the truth. And then I know just when to dream. And I know just where to touch you. And I know just what to prove. I know when to pull you closer. And I know when to let you loose. And I know the night is fading. And I know the time's going to fly. And I'm never going to tell you everything I got to tell you. But I know I've got to give it a try. And I know the road to riches. Super chats. And I know the ways to fame. YouTube. I know all the rules, and then I know how to break them. And I always know the name of the game. But I don't know how to leave you, and I'll never let you fall. And I don't know how you do it, making love out of nothing at all. Every time I see you, all the rays of the sun are streaming through the waves in your hair. And every star in the sky is taking aim at your eyes like a spotlight. The beating of my heart is a drum, and it's lost, and it's looking for a rhythm like you. You can take the darkness at the pit of the night and turn into a beacon burning endlessly bright. I've got to follow it because everything I know, well, it's nothing till I give it to you. I can make the runner stumble. I can make the final block. I can make every tackle at the sound of the whistle. I can make all the stadiums rock. I can make tonight forever, or I can make it disappear by the dawn. I can make you every promise that has ever been made, and I can make all your demons be gone. But I'm never going to make it without you. Do you really want to see me crawl? I'm never going to make it like you do, making love out of nothing at all.
Important because if there were to be no electoral college majority, the House would have to vote on it. On a state-by-state level, not as it typically votes up or down on legislation, and Republicans would have a lead there. Not a huge lead, but a lead all the same. So I think it's quite likely that Pompeo knows some stuff that we're not privy to. If he thought that Trump were surely going to lose, I don't think it came out and said what he said today, to say the least. Patrick, anything to say about what Socrates brought up?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's what Pompeo thinks is the case, that is the outcome, that Trump will be reelected. But also, obviously, he's as far as I can tell, he's very much a Trump team player. And so even if he didn't think that, it would make sense to say it at this point. So just like the Biden folks, those closest to Trump are going to, say what makes sense PR-wise, optics-wise for them to say at this point.
And from Biden-Harris, great to have Mr. Basham on. Hard to see how DI nailed the election, was very far off in many states, plus Electoral College lost 200 quid thanks to dodgy DI polling, LOL. Patrick, I think this is definitely geared toward you. Anything to say about it?
Well, I'm very sorry that you've lost money. There's two ways of going at this. I'll try to keep this sort of general because I don't want to bore too many of your audience members with the minutiae of polling statistics and all the rest of it. The two ways to go at it are, one, if you take the results, or even the media, well, haven't said admitted the results are complete. Even if you go with what are alleged to be the official tallies, then our polling was pretty good. It was we weren't the only ones. There were two or three others that also had results that were either on the mark or close to, depending on whether you're looking nationally or at the state level, and all of that. Whereas the vast majority of the media pollsters and university pollsters were quite a bit off. I think that's self-acknowledged by them. And as those of us who were the quote-unquote outliers were all saying it was a competitive race for Trump, that means that we were just by definition the close ones. If you don't accept that the results are yet the final official results, then and you take the argument, it's my argument, I suspect it might be Joseph's, but I should not speak for him or anyone else, and certainly the argument that many people who know as much or more than I do about this have made, which is that polls like ours were not 100% dead on, but very close to being dead on until everyone awoke on Wednesday morning.
Okay, Rodney Martin says 3 Supreme Court justices have issued a statement. There is a strong likelihood that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's order violates the U.S. Constitution. Okay.
I see a lot of lockdowns. I really don't.
But Greg, there are people sharing champagne bottles in the streets and putting their masks back on.
Yeah, but that's okay because Biden, won. So you can go out and celebrate. But God forbid you go to church. Then you are a super spreader. But you see Biden say he's going to win. Everybody goes out and nobody cares. I think the word of the day should be, or 2 words, death rates, which have been declining dramatically, and the media doesn't cover it enough. The media focuses on new cases. The reason why you see new cases, Testing. As we test more, you get more and more cases because it's so prevalent. If you test, you're going to find it. So it's going to rise the more you look at it. But the good news is people are becoming more resilient for some reason. I don't know, with the illness. So we should be getting our lives back to normal. And remember, the World Health Organization said that lockdowns don't work.
Yeah.
Right. Ron, final word to you on the lockdown fiasco.
Well, thanks, Katie.
Okay, so trying to find some substantiation for these claims about the Supreme Court. So it's not being talked about on Fox
Over the
News.
next 5 or 10 years, the Chinese Communist Party is absolutely the central threat. They are here. They are influencing the way we think about the world. They have technologies that are very capable. They have stolen intellectual property that's destroyed millions of jobs in places like Kansas and Iowa and Michigan in our heartland. We cannot build out election infrastructure to make sure that they had transparency, to make sure that they follow their own rules, their own systems. That's all we're asking for, is to make sure that we follow our own rules, our own constitution, our own law. We have a transparent system, one that we need to keep pressing on. The entire team that the president's had for my 4 years has accomplished. I'm hopeful we'll have more time to continue to work to keep Americans safe.
You fought to have Gina Haspel at CIA. The FBI director currently. Do you think the president's going to make changes there as well?
I'll leave those decisions about people to the president. I'm focused on the mission. I'm focused on working with the team to make sure that we deliver on behalf of the American people.
Okay, last thing. 2024, either way, do you have aspirations politically, either at the highest office in the land or a certain Kansas Senate seat that may come open?
Brett, you know me better than that. I appreciate you asking, but I'm focused. I'm focused on what I'm doing today. I'll keep at that.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we appreciate your time, and we'll check back in before January 20th.
That sounds great, Brett. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so here is a press release from the major law firm Jones Day. United States Supreme Court is currently deciding. 4 justices agreed with our client's position and voted to grant a stay, indicating they believe there was a fair prospect of review and reversal by the court. 3 Supreme Court justices have issued a statement. There is a strong likelihood that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's order violates the U.S. Constitution. So this is a statement from Jones Day, major law firm. All right, let's see here. There's Patrick Basham. What the heck?
Morning and found that things have changed, shall we say. So, that's we may find out how much closer to the mark we were. We may not. I hold out hope. I'm again, what about your bet? I assume it was a personal bet because if anyone who's bet with any of the say British bookmakers or the like, they haven't paid out. They have not paid out either way on this. The reason they haven't is because, as they correctly state, the result is unknown, right? So we will have to wait and see. So I assume if you either have lost, it was a personal bet, or you're presuming that you have lost. And just to not argue against myself, but just to go against a little bit of what I just said in terms of not drawing into the details, it has been noted by those who are taking the official results at quote unquote official results at face value. They have noted, we missed on this state, we missed on that state. What has not been noted by those folks, though, is how we nailed the vast majority of states. Like, for example, I believe we were the.
And Robert Prosper notes something in the chat. What Trump needs is a hero. Is he holding out for a hero to the break of the dawn? He's got to be fast, and he's got to be sure, and he's got to be fresh from the fight. Luke is that hero.
Closest on Florida. We were just a few decimal points off nailing Florida on the button. We were talking, as Joseph will recall, and maybe some of you in the audience, talking for several months about how Donald Trump was going to do well with African Americans, how he was going to do well with Hispanics, especially in Florida and Texas, how he was going to do especially well with white rural voters without a college degree. All these sorts of things. How suburban white women were coming back to him in the last couple of months of the campaign due to the law and order issue. How the corona.
Okay, so what the heck? I know what's on your mind. What's going on with Baked Alaska? Is he okay? Is Mary Prankster Baked Alaska going through a tough time? Appears to be having some kind of meltdown as his exploits move in ever-contracting circles. Recent weeks, he's been kicked off some of the platforms he'd been using because of his increasingly unhinged pranks. The other day, he was even kicked out of a Proud Boys Stop the Steal demo. He was trying to grift off by live streaming at it. Also involved was Catboy Kami, an associate of Baked Alaska Nick Fuentes, who made a Fed-tier neo-Nazi Jew-hating speech in an obvious attempt to smear the Proud Boys.
We have been cheated over and over and over. Go ahead. My brothers and sisters, in these uncertain times, we must remember family comes from the blood that courses through our veins. For centuries, parasites have poisoned our minds with the lie that our enemies are our brothers with different labels, but our enemies manufactured both. These rats in human disguise and their puppets revel in watching us kill ourselves. We will not fall for their evil tricks again. We will not fall for the lies of the Jews this time. This time, we know our war is with them. USA! 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 I'm Catboy Kami and I hate niggas.
Whoa. Disavow.
You're yes, racist. So what?
All you are saying, that's what Trump is
Disavow.
USA! USA! USA!
Whoa, I gotta disavow that, man.
I don't need to wear a mask outside. You better fucking watch who you talk to, bitch. You're outside right now. You better watch who you talk to, bitch. You're outside right now. You better watch who you talk to, bitch. He is harassing me outside telling me I need to wear a mask. You got fucking tits. You got your fucking man tits. Go get a fucking bra, bro. You got a mask on your face? Get a mask on your tits. Get some mask on your tits. What? He's telling me to wear a mask outside? I don't need to wear a mask outside. I'm not a fucking communist, bro. You're a communist. Whoa! Holy shit, what are you doing, dude? Don't shake that in my ear, bro. Don't shake that in my ear, bro. He's telling me to wear a mask outside. Fuck that shit, bro. Fuck you and your soy boy tits. You're communists. SJW check. He was, look, listen, I'm not mad at you. He was outside saying, wear a mask, I'm walking. Your mouth isn't in there. Your nose isn't in there. Why are you're calling the cops on me? Isn't this America? Do we not have any rights anymore? You're in here without a mask.
Out of the door.
No, I'm not high. I'm not high. What is going on? Why are you yelling? Why are you guys yelling, dude? What are you doing? Stop it. No, I don't. No, you shouldn't yell at me like that. You don't have a. She's smoking inside. I am calling the Better Business Bureau. You're smoking inside, and you don't have a mask. Are you work here now too? You work out too? What the fuck, bro? What the fuck? Okay. What is? Why are you all yelling at me? Why are you yelling at me? I'm just trying to get a burger. I got a crown. I'm the king. I'm the king now. I'm the Burger King, okay?
I don't see anything wrong. He seems pretty healthy to me.
No, you need to get out. He needs to get out. He needs to get out. You should get out. No, I'm not doing shit. No, you need to get out. The problem. Get out of here. You're the problem. You're the problem. Get him out. Get him out. Get out. Do not fucking touch me, dude. Stop. Stop. No. Get him out. No. Get him out. This guy's always causing the problem. No, I'm not. You're always causing the problem. Get out. Yes, you are, big director. I have the First Amendment. You're always causing problems. I have the First Amendment. Stop it. I have the First Amendment to be here. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I have the First Amendment to be here. I am peaceful. I'm not. They attacked me. I'm not doing shit. Don't touch me. Stop touching me. Don't touch your energy. Get out.
Okay, what else is there?
For all of you fucking journalists. For all of you fucking journalists. For all of you white liberals. For all of you white liberals who have been celebrating. Getting drunk off your asses. And drunk off your asses. About Biden winning this election. You are all a bunch of fucking fools. You are all a bunch of fucking fools. Get it together. Get it together! Get it together! Get together! Get shit together! And keep this in mind! You are using this plaza! As a tourist attraction! You are all acting! Like this is fucking Disney World! This is not fucking Disney World! You have all colonized this space! For your own benefit! We will not have it here! We are not going anywhere! We are still gonna be here! Protesting! Fighting! Advocating! For our black! Brown! Indigenous! Brown! Queer! Non-binary! People who have been killed by police! Thank you!
Wow, that's powerful.
Coronavirus pandemic issue was not the most important issue for voters for some months. The list goes on. All these things were supported by the exit polls and by the votes tallies themselves. So we did not have a perfect poll. We didn't think it would never be perfect, but we had, even by the quasi-official result, we had a very good one. And our media sponsor is delighted with the fact that we are, as far as they're concerned, the outfit that came the closest to getting this right. And if you bear in mind that those quasi-official results are unlikely to be the actual results, then I think you have to say that we did even better than that. So we'll learn from the things we got wrong, and we'll be proud of the things that we got right.
From Wojak Woes, why were pollsters so far off in Texas and Florida? I'm tempted to say this was directed at Patrick, but in case it was both of us, I'll just give my very quick views. In Texas, the polls up until like last week, from what I recall, showed a tied or Biden leading. Then most showed Trump leading, but I don't think any of them got the exact percentage that wound up winning Texas by. It was more than what they anticipated. I think they oversampled probably people in urban areas, and they had a very, very skewed perspective on how the Hispanic vote there was going to go. And same deal in Florida, pretty much. Really, I mean, polling in Florida showed Trump for the most part down a bit, other than the DI insider advantage, which only showed Trump up by 1. The DI was much closer. And I don't even think Trafalgar. I think Trafalgar showed Trump up by 2. Was it 2 points? It's probably 3 or was it 2? I think it's probably 2. Florida, people badly misjudge Hispanics, and I think they sample people from urban areas. And also, in all cases, I think I just have a population that's more likely to answer polls, which is Democratic leaning than Republican leaning. So that I think is going to throw any pollster off in any place on general principle. So that's my take there, Wojak. But I'm sure Patrick has a much more detailed one. Anything to say about what Wojak brought up?
Well, I agree with everything you said, Joseph. I mean, Texas and Florida were microcosms of the larger problem with most of the polling. The methodology, the samples skewed Democratic, disproportionately so. They were weighted too heavily Democratic. The Republicans that they polled weren't representative of the full Republican sample. They assumed a youth turnout that didn't happen. They assumed that Hispanics and African Americans would stay largely loyal to the Democrats. All of that. I've said this ad nauseum in recent days when asked about how we got. To add a little more to my previous answer to the previous question. I'm being asked repeatedly in recent days, how come we knew there was a shy Trump voter, right? Because even some of the media is recognizing there has to have been for Trump to have received 71 million votes at least, several million than he did last time. And my answer is always the same. We looked for them. And you used to think, well, that's really obvious, Patrick. How does that enlighten us? Well, it's in contrast to those media polls and university polls, which didn't find a Trump voter. And of course, if you don't believe something exists, therefore you don't look for it, it's odds on you're not going to find it, right? So those Trump male and female Trump voters were not found. And in Texas and especially Florida, we saw that they were there, as did Trafalgar, as did Richard Barris's big data poll. He didn't project in sort of factor that in, but he recognized that they were there. whereas Trafalgar and ourselves actually factor that into our totals, right? So the shy Trump vote was alive and well, especially in Florida, and as much as the Hispanic success for Trump has received a lot of play, what has received some play but not enough is how African Americans broke for Donald Trump disproportionately.
Okay, what does Steve Bannon have to say?
We have not yet begun to fight, okay? Trust me, brother. We're taking this one. All you lefties, it's not, I know you're because we're just getting wins every day. You got Biden wandering around. We got Pompeo. We got Blunt. We got Mitch. You're seeing unity right now. Transition? We're no hurry transition. We're already here. We're transitioning to second term. My point is we got a bonus 80 days. Let's throw down. Let's start firing some guys. Let's start cleaning house. We have only started. I want everybody on the left to fully melt down. First off, he's going to be doing rallies. He's going to be going around, and you got the big scoreboard Jack Max is going to have. We got FAR violations already for Hunter and James Biden. We're this close away from getting a special prosecutor, okay? There's nothing but wins here. So for the MAGA crowd, understand something. The numbers are coming back to us in Arizona. The numbers are going to be on our side in Georgia. We got a major lawsuit that's going to flip this in Pennsylvania. We got a major lawsuit we're going to drop today that's going to flip it in Michigan. Wisconsin, the reason I'm not hearing anything out of there, the left is very nervous about Wisconsin. Nevada, you have the DOJ there looking into criminal activity. There's nothing but wins. You know what they got? They got CNN calling winner, and CNN has no standing. Joe Biden has no standing. They're sitting with their nose pressed up at Glenn Square. We even got the GSA to say, hey, sorry, not sorry, no keys to the office. We're winning. You know why we're winning? Because we won on the 3rd of November. Call the Biden campaign and tell them, let's unite as a country right now. And let's have radical transparency. You know the reason they won't do it? Because the votes are not legal. They're not verifiable. There's no chain of custody. They mix them all up. They're not verifiable. If they were verifiable, brother, they would open it up. It's not, and we're going to win this. And Mike Pompeo, what did Pompeo? Hey, we're doing transition to a second term. Yeah, brother, second term. Trump's ultimate victory. It's so sweet. It's such justice. It's such justice.
Okay, I've got another video here. What do I want to show you? Not that. Not that, not that, not that. Oh, man.
To the historical norm, right? And as we said all along, this year there were two hidden Trump voters, especially. They were white suburban women, and they were African American males, especially in the cities, in the urban centers. And we saw some of that in Florida. So if pollsters are going to learn lessons, we all have to learn lessons. Like I said, we weren't perfect, although I think we did very well. We have to learn lessons from 2020, as hopefully, but clearly we didn't all learn from 2016. And there are worse places to start. Probably there may not be a better place to start than Florida in terms of figuring out how to get 2022 and 2024 more accurately.
And from, I hope I'm going to mispronounce this, but I'll try. Dahanithiatha Suresh Gauda. I hope I got that right. Apologies if I didn't. Kato, I follow you on Twitter avidly, and I love your sharp sense of humor. Thank you very much. Definitely not for the tender-hearted. No, it's not. My question is, do you trust the legislators and Supreme Court judges to do the right thing? Well, as I understand it, Trump is already putting the pressure on Republicans in Pennsylvania to do what he would perceive as the right thing. And I think in places like Wisconsin and Georgia, they probably much more prone to go along with him if they did not have a result which they found to be conclusive. So I think that the legislators also have a self-interest angle here, because if they wind up voting for what is perceived, especially by the Republican electorate, to be a fraudulent, if they wind up approving what the Republican electorate perceives as fraudulent returns, these legislators will be sure to lose their next primary. Absolutely no question about it. That's going to happen.
Okay, so Matt Braynard here. He works for the Trump recount.
My name is Matt Braynard. I'm the former director of data and strategy for President Trump's campaign in 1996, and I've been working in this field going all the way back to 1996 when I first started at the Republican National Committee in the Political Analysis Department. I've also worked in this field for the nation's premier election administration and redistricting firm, Election Data Service, for about a decade, and I've worked as an independent consultant on campaigns all across the country, everything from president all the way down to town council, with a tremendous amount of experience in the voter data and election administration field. So I wanted to walk through the process that we're using to potentially identify fraudulent votes. Talk about where we currently are in that process, and also sort of address some of the questions that came up on Twitter. So I want to be as transparent as possible, and this is part of that. Please bear with me. I'm quite exhausted. It's been a very busy couple of days. I did not expect to be doing this. I had a family vacation planned in the Dominican Republic that I had to cancel, and thankfully my wife has been incredibly patient with that change. Hopefully we'll get to go later when things settle down. But right now, this is where I'm needed. So I'm going to walk through the process. I have a hastily drawn diagram here that I'm going to use to sort of explain what's going on, because I know that there have been just so many questions, and I just absolutely want to be as transparent as possible about what I'm trying to do here, what my team is trying to do. So let's move me up to the corner here. Okay. I want to make clear that I've seen a lot of charts and graphs and maps showing anomalous things, and I've seen a lot of rumors. I don't believe any of that is actually actionable. Actionable meaning two things: something that could lead to a legal remedy, or something that could lead to reforms in how elections are carried out in states across this country. The only things I think that will make a difference are affidavits and death certificates. Affidavits, somebody saying this happened or this didn't happen, contrary to the records that the election systems in various states have, and death certificates suggesting that somebody may have voted who in fact is no longer alive. So that's really what we're angling for here. And while maps and theories might lead us to places where we can find affidavits and death certificates, ultimately those are the only two things that I believe will make a difference. So on this chart, what we've collected from 6 target states are the early voting and absentee requests, the raw files from the states, their own records exported out of their computer systems. We've then had them enhanced by our commercial vendor at great expense to add things that might have been missing, like date of birth, phone numbers, whether or not they're on the NCOA list, which is the National Change of Address Database. Anytime you move and you fill out a little card to get your mail forwarded to you, you go into a database that then the Postal Service sells for a lot of money, as well as the Social Security Death Index / master death file to find if there are any matches there. We then break this data set into 2 different groups: those that returned their ballots and those that didn't. I'm going to talk first about those that did not return a ballot. Our plan for these people for whom we have a phone number matched is to reach out to them and ask them 2 questions. Number 1, did you request a ballot? Number 2, did you return a ballot? If they said they didn't request a ballot, that's a red flag. If they said they returned a ballot, but it didn't show up, it didn't get back to the clerk's office, that is also a red flag. And in both of those cases, when our contact team through phone and text identifies somebody who answers either of those 2 questions that way, it goes straight to our affidavit team, because a rumor of somebody saying something or somebody's cousin said something to something, I've heard it all. There's nothing short of an affidavit that is definitive. So we need that level of definitiveness to be able to establish anything. Okay, so let's go to the other branch. Those who returned their absentee ballots or who did in fact vote early in person. We're going to put these into 3 different categories: those who are matched to our deceased list, those who are matched to the National Change of Address list, and those who are otherwise lower inactive voters. These are people who perhaps have never voted, or maybe they voted once 10 years ago. They incidentally registered to vote because they did it when they got their driver's license or when they graduated high school or something. Let's talk first about deceased. Just because somebody gets matched doesn't actually mean they're actually dead. So that's why we're going to have our research team go through several additional steps to try to establish whether or not this individual actually had a ballot cast, and this is an individual who is in fact deceased. In many of these cases, if in theory there is a organized ballot fraud operation in any of these states, in all likelihood they're looking for voters on the rolls who have not voted in a while. Among the people who have not voted in a while are those who are dead, who did not get scrubbed from the state list. Some states scrub somewhat vigorously, some don't scrub at all for all kinds of different reasons. But if you were running such an operation, you probably wouldn't be double checking whether or not people were dead or not. You're just casting as many ballots as you possibly can, because who's going to look it up, right? But that would be indicative potentially of a much larger operation, especially if there's any geographical concentration of where these deceased are. The next tranche of data are those who were found to have been in the National Change of Address database. That means they requested a ballot and they returned it, or they showed up in person, and the address that ballot was mailed to is not the address they live at anymore. We're going to do 2 things with them. First of all, if they are in fact out-of-state NCOA, we're going to get that to our legal team to evaluate whether that vote was cast illegally due to lack of a residency requirement. That is in fact an illegal vote, and if we can establish that, we'll bring attention to it. We're also going to have our research team look at that, because one of the most tried and true ways of detecting illegal ballots is that somebody moved away, they requested an absentee ballot, got it, voted, but also voted in their home state. So we're going to look for cases of double voting by comparing our target states to other states, particularly adjacent states that people are most likely to have moved to. Anybody that we found on our NCOA list that we were able to match a phone number to, our contacts team is going to reach out to them through phone and text to ask them 2 questions, the same 2 questions we asked the unreturned, but we're looking for a slightly different answer. We're asking whether or not they requested a ballot. If they said no, that's a big red flag. That means that they didn't request a ballot, yet in their name a ballot was requested, sent.
That's why CarShield is
returned.
America's
or somebody
number
showed up
one
at an early voting location, claimed to be them, and cast a ballot. That immediately gets them over to our affidavit team. We asked whether or not they returned a ballot, because maybe they did request a ballot. But if they didn't return it, and maybe the reason they didn't return it was because they didn't get it in the first place, again, a big red flag, and straight over to the affidavit team. One other group, the low and inactive voters, they were people, again, who've not voted in a long time, and we're going to reach out to them if we have budget and resources, and again, ask them those same questions. Did they request a ballot or not? And if they said no, right over to affidavit team. Maybe this was the one election where they decided to do so, and they did, they got it, but they didn't return it. Again, right over to affidavit team. So this is, and this is not an absolute.
And the results of the election focuses in on Pennsylvania. There are other legal battles, but the legal struggle ramping up in Pennsylvania as the counting the votes moves on there is intense. Senior correspondent Eric Shawn has the latest on that battle and others around the nation from Philadelphia.
Alleging a slew of voting problems and irregularities, President Trump's campaign is suing 5 states to stop them from certifying a win by Joe Biden. In razor-thin Arizona, where about 15,000 votes separate the two candidates and the counting continues, the campaign says some votes were improperly included. Trump campaign advisor Boris Epshteyn believes the legal push will help the president pull out a win.
There's still votes to be released from Maricopa County, about 25,000. That's been great for the president. And still maybe about 18 to 20,000 votes out of Pima County, which has also actually been moving very strongly for President Trump. So we feel very good about the release of the numbers and think we will win on the numbers.
In Pennsylvania, the campaign wants to bounce 682,000 mail-in votes in Democrat-rich Philadelphia because it claims GOP watchers could not properly see them being counted. State House Republicans want a voter fraud probe.
Our constituents are demanding concrete action, and it's our firm conviction that we must take these steps and ensure public trust in our electoral system.
But Philadelphia election officials reject those claims, saying there are no illegal votes being counted, that every mail-in vote is inspected and double-checked, and Republican watchers observed alongside their Democratic counterparts. Quote, the observers have been in the room since beginning. In Michigan, the Trump campaign claimed unregistered people voted and some ballots were backdated. That suit dismissed, as was a similar one in Georgia. Election officials doubt the Trump legal strategy will work.
There is no systematic widespread voter fraud. I think if folks have concerns or of irregularities, we need to look into them.
And tonight, that U.S. Postal Service whistleblower who claimed in Erie, Pennsylvania that a supervisor ordered the backdating of ballots to commit voter fraud has recanted. That, according to the agency's inspector general. Brett?
Eric Shawn live in Philadelphia. Eric, thank you. We'll continue to look into all of these. Republicans controlling the Senate have unveiled a government-wide
Tell your doctor right away if you have red color in urine or can new customers compete for that top
media buzz. Howard Kurtz.
As Joe Biden assumes the role of president-elect, this might be a celebratory time for many liberals. But some are increasingly frustrated and angry at President Trump's voters. The View's Whoopi Goldberg called their doubts about the election ridiculous.
Hillary Clinton didn't say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, stop the count. She didn't say, this isn't right, I'm not going for it. She didn't say any of that. So all of you, suck it up. Suck it up like we sucked it up.
Many Republicans are taking their lead from the president, disputing the projection of a Biden victory by the major networks and his unproven allegations of widespread voter fraud. And that has sparked a backlash. Former MSNBC co-host Torre told Trump voters, I hope the pain and anxiety you feel now is excruciating. You voted against America. And The View co-host Sunny Hostin denounced Trump supporters for backing him.
I'm not going to say that 50% of Americans are racist and sexist and homophobic, but I will say that tells me that they will look the other way. And that, I think, is despicable. It is un-American.
But when it came to Trump's election, some Democrats didn't exactly suck it up.
He knows he's an illegitimate president.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election.
Even Biden responded last year to a woman calling the president illegitimate.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
The media are now taking note of a few Democrats urging employers to shun ex-Trump staffers. CNN's Jake Tapper tweeted that while he sympathizes with those who lost, they should consider not only the benefits of a peaceful transfer of power, but how any future employers might see your character defined during adversity. But he backtracked today, writing that any blackballing seems the exact opposite of Biden's calls for unity and healing. By turning to taunting, some liberal pundits risk being seen as sore winners. Even in this tense time, it hardly seems un-American for 71 million people to have voted for Donald Trump as their preferred candidate. Brett?
Thanks, Howard. Thanks for stopping by the Luke Ford Show, live from the Relief Factor Pain-Free studio.
We've got some other tactics we're looking at. But this is where our focus is right now. Now, our research team is always looking out for additional anomalies. My mailbox is full of people pointing out, this happened. In some cases where we think that looking at what somebody brings us is it could be productive or fruitful, we're certainly going to take a look. But right now, we're kind of constrained by resources, those primarily being financial and manpower. And we're on a very, very tight timeline, which is why I kind of want to get to my next point here, which is my inbox is filled with people who want to help. It seems like every right-leaning person who can write SQL or write code has reached out. And it's greatly appreciated, but for the most part, I regret I can't really take advantage of it. The timeline is slow. I don't know. So many steps are strange.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes.
You being serious there?
We'll have a smooth transition, and we'll see what the people ultimately decided when all the votes have been cast. We have a process, Brett. The Constitution lays out how electors vote. It's a very detailed process laid out. We need to comply with all of that, and then I am very confident that we will have a good transition.
Well, that's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo earlier today, and then in our interview here on Special Report about the transition and the process. Let's bring in our panel. Former Tennessee Congressman Harold Ford Jr., Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com, also the host of the Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. Guy, what about what the Secretary said today, what the administration is saying right now, digging in its heels as these legal challenges move forward?
Well, I think the initial comment that got so much attention was probably Pompeo being a little bit tongue-in-cheek and playing with the media and the people who asked him the question. You can make the case maybe that's not something that a high-ranking government official should be cavalier about, but in his responses to you, I think this is just a wait-and-see mode, right? They're sort of in a holding pattern, waiting to see what happens with some of these legal challenges that are popping up across the country. And he said ultimately he's confident that there will be a smooth transition. To whom or to what? Unspecified, but I think everyone sort of understands what the likeliest outcome is here, and it's the one that has been projected as the true outcome by our decision desk.
Harold, we heard Hillary Clinton weeks before Election Day say to Joe Biden, whatever happens.
Then President-elect Trump to the White House.
to see Joe Biden today when asked by a reporter that very few Republicans are calling you Mr.
Elect is what he's talking about. Molly, your thoughts?
Well, we will all remember that 4 years ago when Donald Trump won election, the Obama-Biden administration spied on his incoming administration, and many people refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of his election, including, I think, 60-some members of Congress who refused to go to his inauguration. And, of course, they spent the entirety of this first term refusing to acknowledge it. But what we have here is a really serious issue with a voting system that we have never quite done before. We had a real rushed move to mail-in balloting. This is very controversial. A lot of Americans have been saying for months they didn't think that there were the appropriate amounts of checks on it. And this is not an idle concern. I mean, election fraud is something that happens all the time. You had earlier this year a former Democratic member of Congress sentenced along with the election judge in Philadelphia who he bribed to stuff ballots over the course of many elections. A couple years ago in New Jersey, they had a revote for election irregularities that weren't even deemed necessarily to have changed the outcome of election. And we know that when you move to mail-in balloting, the opportunities for fraud ramp up quite a bit, particularly when you're not doing checks on signatures, when people aren't allowed to observe vote totals. The more distance that you put between people voting and the vote being counted in terms of time and distance, that makes things ripe for systematic fraud. So telling Americans that they don't need to be worried about it when they have been worried about it is not something that's going to lead to confidence in the system.
Okay, let's go back to Matt Braynard discussing the vote fraud investigation.
Everybody's offered so generously or has an idea or something like that and give everyone an individual response. I've really done my best to do that. But if you reached out and you said, hey, I can help with this, and you didn't hear back from me, it's not because of any animosity, because I don't think you've got something to add. It's just that given the timeline, when I need a resource, I've got to reach out to people that I know I can count on, that I know are real, that I know can turn things around. And that's basically how we're building out our team. Tomorrow we'll have, I think, 2 or 3 additional people joining us in our headquarters here, and they'll be building out the research team. We have a potential lawyer coming on, so we're building the team as quickly as possible. But again, there has to be some sort of trust factor in. If I had months to do this, I'd love for everybody who volunteered to do something to find a way to put them to work. But given the timeline, right now all we really need is cash. So I want to go. I want to go through the Twitter questions because I did offer to take questions for people who responded to that tweet. So I'll just try to get through them quickly so this video doesn't go on too long. In many cases, you need tens of thousands of votes to be invalidated. I don't believe that we actually need to demonstrate enough votes were cast fraudulently to overcome a margin of victory. I think historically, at least in terms of legal remedies for this are concerned, substantial evidence of a concerted effort. It doesn't necessarily have to be the number of ballots to overturn an election that we have to identify. We just have to identify a pattern that's likely to happen. And again, the only way you can really prove a pattern like that is affidavits and death certificates. And that's what we're chasing, and that's very expensive. Let's see any other questions here. Have we been able to run against SSDI and master death file? Yes, our vendor, in fact, who's running this actually has 5 outside vendors that are running that against, along with state supply. So we think it's pretty rigorous, and we're doing full match on birth date, full birth date. And that's not enough because, again, our team is going to have to individually go through each one of those records before we actually make the claim, yes, this is a ballot cast by a dead person. What are we doing to collect and analyze the data? Me and my partner here, you want to slip into the camera? Don't be shy. Yeah, he and I have been working together since 1997. We actually started on the Trump team together in 1996. I've got about 50 years of experience doing this, and we're actually bringing other people too that have similar, experience in the area as well. Matt, does it make sense to focus on key urban counties first rather than statewide? It certainly does if there's a concentration of NCOA or underturned ballot activity in those areas. So yeah, we're going to give additional scrutiny to areas where we see geographic concentration because let's say there's a lot of quote-unquote dead voters, but they're all in one precinct. That would be a very big red flag. So we certainly have a geographical awareness, and there's several different angles we're looking at this. Do we have the ability to cross-reference ballots, only mark the top of the ticket for Biden with a live voter base? So what we're talking about here, the technical term for that is undervotes, where there are certain races where they're just not marked. I know there's been a lot of evidence provided of where there's tremendous number of votes for Biden, but then a lot of undervotes where people are just not filling out the rest of the ticket. That doesn't actually prove anything. What it does, though, is give us an indication of a geography if it's happening a lot, where we then apply our process. Because if it is happening, well, there's a chance, or it's indicative that it may not actually be real voters, that might actually be fraud. And what does that lead to? Everybody say it with me. Affidavits and death certificates. Right. Well, I post data publicly so everyone else can evaluate. Yes, but with a limit. The raw data we got from the state, we're not allowed to just dump that out. But anybody that gets through, basically, that gets pretty far down the affidavit team, yeah, all of that will be released, along with any affirmative deaths, deceased voters that we find. So yeah, once we get them through our pipeline, we're more than happy to release it. Honestly, I'd love to release the state data. I'd love to release the data that the vendor gave back to us with all this stuff enhanced. Unfortunately, the agreements I had to sign to get them prevent us from doing that directly. However, as we work them through our process through these funnels, we'll definitely be making everything public, as well as counts. We've made counts so far already for 2 states. I think maybe tonight Nevada will get back to us, and then we'll have the other 3 states. We'd like to report at least the top line numbers as quickly as possible. What would the first milestone be? It depends on how you count. I would think in some cases it just would be reporting those top line numbers to start to raise pressure for additional investigation, potentially by legislative bodies or other organizations. Affidavits would certainly be an important milestone, and anybody we affirm as being dead and haven't cast a ballot. So I think those would be definite milestones, but they come to us when they can, and we're doing our best. And the reality is we may not find any of those things. I'll talk about that in a moment. Let's see. How many dead people and change of address people request mail-in ballot in the states? I've reported those numbers on my Twitter feed and on the updates to the Give, Send, Go, and I think a few other places. So just keep up there, and those numbers will be reported. A lot of the questions about voting machines being hacked, that's going to have to be an investigation done by, if we get expertise in that area, we'd love to fund it and get it going. But right now, our focus is very specific. And it's not an area I know too terribly much about. What's the best way to reach me? Matt@Braynard.com. You can also DM me on Twitter, but that's email would be better because it makes it easier for me to read it. Question: you can explain what we're doing. Explain as if I'm a 5-year-old. Well, I think we've done that the best we can in this video. Show what results you've achieved. Where's the money going? Every receipt, every invoice I pay is going out the door. I'll talk briefly about the money situation. The money's been released from Give, Send, Go to Stripe. Stripe is indicating I'm not getting any of the money until I think next Monday. In the meantime, I've found a few major donors who've been willing to give, I shouldn't call them donors, but major loaners who've been willing to front a little bit of money to help cover things that, because the data in the call centers, they're very reluctant to front me because, there's a lot of money at stake. But pretty much everything's going to pay for data and call centers, outreach, text messaging. And most of the people working around here are working for very little or free or just trying to pick up some expenses. And I'm actually getting, of the money raised through the Give, Send, Go, not a penny. So. But everything will be accounted for. I've already posted one invoice for the raw data of 60K, and I've got an invoice to post from at least the calls that are happening tonight in Georgia and Pennsylvania. I think they started around 4 p.m. Eastern today for I think around 50 grand. Expect another invoice tomorrow for the data enhancements. I'm guessing it's going to probably be another 30 to 50 grand, maybe less. We'll see. See any other questions here? What are the circumstances need to sign an affidavit? I think I've already covered that. Dead voters, you find them in clusters or spread out. We're still evaluating that. That is a good point. Will we report our findings and homework regardless of whether it leads to fraud or not? I think I don't see a whole lot of other questions that aren't already answered by the process. I'm going to answer that. Is that, as somebody not satisfied with the outcome of this election, I think it's important that if it turns out that there actually was not widespread organized vote fraud that affected the outcome of the election, if we find that that's very unlikely, I don't think we can definitively prove it, but demonstrate it's unlikely, it's very important that we report that as such. Because if that is the case, then it's very important that those on the right recognize why this election was lost and what can be done differently in the future, particularly in terms of organizing. Community organizing among the neglected constituent of the rural and blue-collar voters or Americans. So we can talk more about that subsequently, but we absolutely will report if we find nothing or we find little to nothing. We're going to report everything we find. If we do find substance, trust me, we're going to bring it forward. But if all this results in essentially nothing, then we'll report that as well. And I think it's important. It's important that this, whether you're a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter, I think it's important that the investigation we're doing right now happens. Because if you're a Biden supporter and you believe that nothing illegal or illegitimate happened, but then it's very important that people like me come forward and do this investigation and say, you know what, looks like you're right. Because the uninvestigated suspicion of voter fraud is toxic to this democracy. So I would encourage everybody to support this.
Okay, this is
Hey folks, welcome to the second hour of American Agenda. I'm Bob Sellers. Attorney General William Barr is urging federal prosecutors to examine allegations of voting irregularities before states certify election results in the coming weeks. This as the president and his legal team continue to make the case for election fraud. Joining me now is the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who's leading this election legal fight. So tell me, sir, how are things going? Where do things stand right now?
Well, after filing a lawsuit yesterday in Pennsylvania, which supported by 50-plus witnesses that say that Republicans were excluded from observing over 600,000 questionable ballots in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and only in those two Democrat corrupt cities, really. The rest of Pennsylvania, no problem. We think we have a good chance, also, when you consider the additional allegations of fraud there, to have that vote overturned and not certified. I mean, the margin of victory was only 40,000 after the president had been ahead by 700,000. And I think we can show that this was part of a concerted effort on the part of the Democrat Party to do this in 10 different states. Because the same thing they did in Philadelphia, herd the Republicans in corrals, not let them see the ballot. They did it in Pittsburgh, they did it in Detroit, they did it in Milwaukee, they did it in Phoenix, they did it in Las Vegas. They did it in all these places where they have this Democrat machine. And it's impossible that every one of these Democratic leaders woke up the day after the election with the same idea of not allowing Republicans to see the mail ballots and to corral them into chutes, even though the law of their state requires that it be observed by a Republican and a Democrat. And forever, we've done that with absentee ballots. Second, we're about to file a lawsuit now in Michigan, in which, again, hundreds of thousands of ballots were cast without any observation. A Democrat whistleblower working for the board in Detroit has come forward and has given evidence of days and days of fraud. Preparation for it, backdating of votes, going into the polling place with people, showing them how to vote, taking votes of people that weren't registered, and then actually going to the registrar book and registering at the time. She observed all this. She was disgusted with it. She's a Democrat. She's come forward. She's given us an affidavit, and she's at the heart of the Democratic case that we have, which will be filed in Lansing, Michigan, which will show that well more than the margin of victory are illegal votes. And then a very extraordinary thing. Somewhere around 4 or 4:30 in the morning on November 4, right after the election, 100,000 or so ballots showed up at the headquarters. The observers were leaving at that time. So the crooked Democrats in Detroit figured they could count the ballots when the observers weren't around. However, several observers remained behind, and they have given us affidavits. And the affidavits say that these 100,000 ballots that were not properly packaged, they're supposed to be packaged in a big wooden box with an inner box and a seal. They look more like this. Some that had come in earlier in the day, they look somewhat more like in boxes like this. Don't know if you can see that.
Okay, yeah.
And then were laid out like that, which completely destroys the secrecy of the ballot. And then all of a sudden they began counting them very quickly. And 3 different affiants, people who have sworn under oath, this is one of them, Andrew Cito, said that all of these votes, to the extent that he heard them being called out or he observed them, were for Joseph Biden.
Okay,
and that he saw had no one else on the ballot.
Just to be clear, you're talking about that occurred allegedly in Michigan? Is that where you're saying that?
Yes, I'll read you the affidavit.
No, that's okay. You don't have to read it. I just want to make clear where you were talking about.
I'm talking about Andrew Cito in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, at the TCF Center. He was there from 9:30 in the morning. He remained behind when many other people left. At 4:30 in the morning, these shipment of absentee ballots came in. He was told that there were several vehicles outside with out-of-state license plates. They pulled up to the center at 4:30 and they unloaded many boxes of ballots.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of ballots were brought in and placed on 8 long tables.
But Mr. Mayor, could I ask you a question about the process here? Could I ask you? So you filed suit in Pennsylvania regarding the allegations of fraud that you have. Obviously, you say you're going to go to Lansing as far as this situation. I'm kind of curious. What's the timing here in which you expect to get some sort of answer? How it turns out, what kind of remedy are you looking for?
Well, in the case of both Pennsylvania and Michigan, in fact, in every state, this election is guided by the laws of the state legislature. And then it's the state legislature that has to certify the result as honest and fair. We're in a position in both Pennsylvania and Michigan where they can't possibly do that. And now we will move on to Georgia, where the same thing happened, to Wisconsin, to Nevada, where the same thing happened, to Arizona. It's very, very curious that, on Tuesday night, the president was way ahead by 800,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 5% in Michigan, 8% in Wisconsin. And by the next morning, because of things like this, the votes being brought in the middle of the night, the whole thing had changed.
Well, there are people...
It happened in all these places. It can't be a coincidence that they decided they would exclude Republican observers in every one of these places at exactly the same time.
Okay. So in Pennsylvania, you have already filed suit regarding these allegations, correct? Do you know when you would get some sort of answer on that issue?
Well, it's up to the court, and of course, it has to be done on an expedited basis. We have to have an opportunity to call the witnesses. We have 50 of them, but their testimony is rather short, and it's all in affidavit form already. We have to make a record, and then hopefully bring it to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. At the same time, we'll be moving ahead in Lansing, Michigan. There's already been a private case filed in Michigan 2 days ago, similar to ours, but not as complete.
And how many states total have you made or plan to make allegations similar to this?
I would say anywhere from 8 to 10. All of them are states in which we have one common allegation and then different things. The common allegation is that when they started counting these new mail-in votes, they excluded Republicans from observing. They put Republicans mostly in corrals that were 20 and 30 feet away and wouldn't allow us to see most, if at all, any of the ballots.
And what kind of
remedy? Things like we have these ballots that are brought in the middle of the night. We have backdated ballots.
Right.
The ballots had to end on November 3rd, according to Justice Alito. We have thousands and thousands and thousands that have been backdated, and we have witnesses for all of them.
Okay.
So we have numerous instances of fraud, but the common theme is excluding Republicans in 10 different places, and the same system was used. Has to have been a common objective.
Now, if the states come back and say, yes, they were allowed to observe, or even though they were not permitted to observe as you would wish, what do you think the remedy should be? Throwing out every ballot, throwing out the ones involved with that? What would you expect a remedy to be?
First of all, the states aren't going to come back and say they weren't counted the way we wish. They weren't counted based on the law of the state. Each one of these states.
So how does it resolve itself? If they come out, if they were to say, you're absolutely right, that is what happened, and of course we know there'll be arguments against that, but if they say, yes, you're right, how do you think this resolves itself? What happens?
Well, first of all, the votes can't be certified then. The state legislature can't certify an unlawful vote count.
So the state would not certify it, and then what would happen after that?
What we would ask for is that you deduct in those counties the number of votes that we have proven were unlawfully examined.
Okay.
So it's easiest in Pennsylvania because we've done the arithmetic. We can count 633,000 votes that were submitted without any observation by a neutral observer, and certainly not by a Republican.
Okay.
In Detroit,
in that case, you want them thrown out. You don't want to recount. You want them thrown out.
Well, there's no reason to recount them. You can no longer tell whether they're valid or not. Once you remove the envelope, you remove the only thing that tells you whether they're valid or not.
Right. That becomes the naked ballot at that point.
Naked ballot. That's why mail-in voting, even by justices of the Supreme Court 10 and 12 years ago, was thought to be a horrible thing to do.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to...
Okay, so decisive factor in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Maybe all the training that the Azeris have playing under occupation series of Azeri freeware first-person shooters draw set in the near future conflicts in the same region where conflicts have now arisen.
Sultan. Oha. Yeah. Fuck you.
Disavow.
Hayda. Yerime gördünüz.
Gotta disavow this violence.
Ne ay oyun? Amına vurdum bak. Ha.
Wow.
Öldüm.
Decisive.
Ona da boşsun demek ola. Başladı buradan böyle
Decisive.
360 derece söndüğü
That's why the Azeris have done so well, bro. These guys are natural born killers.
Yes.
Yes.
Bizim bayrak. Yes.
Yes. Never again be sex slaves, bro. Never again.
Böyle.
I think without any degree of uncertainty. So these people, who I presume all want to get reelected, the idea that they would then set themselves up for that, I find to be rather unlikely, to say the absolute least. And as for the Supreme Court judges, I think that there is now a narrow majority on the court that probably would act reasonably when it comes to Pennsylvania. I'm obviously not a lawyer, but I think that it's pretty clear that the Trump team's perspective on what's going on or what happened in Pennsylvania is still happening when because the votes are still being counted. I think that the Trump team has the correct perspective there from a constitutional basis, and I think that I can't imagine the Supreme Court as it's presently constituted not going along that. I could be very wrong though. So, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, but that's where I'm coming from there. And let's hope that I'm right about that, but we shall see. And from Eric Karianian, there is a $10 super chat. Very cool of you, Eric. Thank you, but no message. Eric, if you intended to leave a message with that, leave it in the chat as a regular message, and we'll get to it. But thank you in any case, Eric. And from Bojack Woes, anyway, the polling industry redeems public trust. This is probably something for Patrick Ward addressed at me, but I'm not one who thinks much of Frank Luntz, but I think he did get it correct when he said the polling industry. I think he said it's done. He obviously was generalizing there, every single pollster. But I think that the polling industry, for those of us who are skeptical of it, is even more in the doghouse now. But at the same time, I was reading a Vanity Fair article, and it was an interview with a Democratic strategist who was unnamed, but he absolutely despised how the polls performed, and he's distrustful of them. But he said the sad thing is that in 6 months, a lot of people forget about this, and they'll start taking the BS public polling seriously again because it confirms their biases, essentially. So I think the pollsters, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them are banking on that. Certainly, I think Quinnipiac is banking on that, among others. And I don't know that these people, I doubt these people even intend to have accurate results. I think they just are trying to do things that they think will make them money, which is to say giving answers to a certain base that wants to have its biases confirmed, and that's done through the dissemination of polling favorable to what this base wants to happen in any given election season. So when it comes to public trust, I don't think there'll be widespread public trust, but people on the left tend to be far more interested than people on the right in polling anyway. So I think that there is certainly a cottage industry that's been developed, and there is a niche market for it. And even though a lot of the people on the left have had their hearts broken by the polls this time, like they did in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2018, one must note that they still wound up believing in the polls in 2020 after 2016 and 2018. So my understanding of human nature leads me to believe that a lot of people who go gaga over public polls are not going to stop doing so for 2022, even though the polls have not served them well as a rule this time or many times before. Patrick, anything to say about what Bojack brought up?
Yeah, I think that pollsters will still have work in terms of public polling because the media, this has been the latest experiment in can the media set and maintain a narrative? And I think the evidence to date is that, yes, they can, right? Despite many people, many very wise people, dissecting methodologically and otherwise the polls throughout the campaign, those were very strong voices, but they were lone voices that didn't really break through in terms of beyond those who probably were already suspicious based on 2016 and those who hoped that it was 2016 again and most of the polls were wrong, which of course they turned out to be. So the media were able to maintain this narrative that Biden was the all but inevitable winner. And that may or may not, I suspect it did help actually in terms of the official, the quasi-official outcome, in terms of how people responded to the chances they thought of their candidate winning or not winning. So I think it sets up another one of these people versus the powerful dynamics, where the powerful have, as the media in this case, have all the incentive to keep funding polls that don't learn from their mistakes, assuming those mistakes were genuine and unintentional. Whereas the people are going to, those who are cynical are almost more cynical and probably just tune them out completely. And most of those, obviously, in the American context, are on the Trump side. In 2016, you had 2020, and it's sort of most polling is beyond the pale now for most Trump people, as I understand it. But you have those on the Democratic side, I'm talking here about just regular folk, who may or may not have accepted the polls, thought, well, they said they would get it right this time. I'm sure they have. Everyone knows how terrible Trump's been. Everyone hates Trump. Everyone I know hates Trump. I'm definitely voting for Biden. So the fact Biden's up double digits makes perfect sense to me, right? And it turns out that those polls were way off. So whether Biden has actually won a very narrow victory or has lost probably narrowly, those polls were way off. And so for many, I don't know if it's most, but I think for many Biden voters, many Democrats around the country, they're going to feel that, I don't want to say they were misled, but they were misinformed by those polls. And so in 2022 and especially 2024, if it turns out that whoever's running to succeed President Donald Trump after 2 terms, or whoever's running against President Harris at the end of Joe Biden's first term, that whatever those polls say, I think we know that most of those on the Trump side are going to dismiss them out of hand, and those on the Harris side or whoever it may, Biden side, whoever it might be, are going to think, I'd like to believe this 25-point national lead and the 18-point lead in Texas for Harris, but I'm just not sure that I can, count on that. So I think that's, we are moving further and further away from reliability in the polling, and there's no question about it. And it's the pollsters' own fault.
And from Sarah Severson, how long/likely that the Supreme Court of the U.S. follows through on Pennsylvania and orders late ballots tossed? If the ballots can't be identified, also when Trump fails to flip Arizona. Well, obviously, I'm not a for myself for lawyers, but I think that it's hard to put any kind of numerical probability on this. What I can say is that judging what the Supreme Court did in the past with regard to not doing what Republicans wanted and discounting these late-breaking mail ballots entirely, but ordering them to be segregated, which is now currently the case. Even though Pennsylvania's numbers that are reported to the media include the ballots that are of questionable nature. I think that there's a good chance that the Supreme Court will order late ballots to be tossed, but we'll see on that. I think there's a good chance that happens. I'd be surprised if it didn't. And if the ballots can't be identified, that would be for the Supreme Court to decide. Really, it would be. They would have to fashion some remedy there. It's hard to say what they would do. That's much more of a wild card we get.
Okay, here's Rudy Giuliani talking about how they're going to court tomorrow.
The board in Detroit has come forward and has given evidence of days and days of fraud, preparation for it, backdating of votes, going into the polling place with people, showing them how to vote, taking votes of people that weren't registered, and then actually going to the registrar book and registering at the time. She observed all of this. She was disgusted with it. She's a Democrat. She's come forward. She's given us an affidavit, and she's at the heart of the Democratic case that we have, which will be filed in Lansing, Michigan, which will show that well more than the margin of victory are illegal votes. And then a very extraordinary thing, somewhere around 4 or 4:30 in the morning on November 4, right after the election, 100,000 or so ballots showed up at the headquarters. The observers were leaving at that time, so the crooked Democrats in Detroit figured they could count the ballots when the observers weren't around. However, several observers remained behind, and they have given us affidavits. And the affidavits say that these 100,000 ballots that were not properly packaged. They're supposed to be packaged in a big wooden box with an inner box and a seal. They look more like this. Some that have come in earlier in the day, they look somewhat more like in boxes like this. Don't know if you can see that.
Okay, yeah.
And then we're laid out like that, which completely destroys the secrecy of the ballot. And then all of a sudden they began counting them very quickly. And 3 different affiants, people who have sworn under oath, this is one of them, Andrew Cito, said that all of these votes, to the extent that he heard them being called out or he observed them, were for Joseph Biden. Okay. And every ballot he saw had no one else on the ballot.
Just to be clear, you're talking.
We got some pretty good news yesterday from Pfizer, the drug company. Let's throw this up there on the screen. They have unveiled that in early data of their vaccine trials show it's more than 90% effective. Now, obviously, that's great news. That's actually higher. Some analysts were expecting 60 to 70% effective. In the early trials, they're saying 90% is absolutely awesome. That means this could be fast track to the vaccine and all that, right?
Actually said we could have people receiving the vaccine by the end of the year.
Sign me up, folks.
Phenomenal.
I'm ready. Into the vein. That's the second. We'll get to that later. The real thing here, Crystal, is that, of course, because we're not allowed to just have nice things, everybody decides to politicize it immediately. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the government in this particular case can take some credit. So Mike Pence tweets out, let's throw this up there on the screen. He says, thanks to the public-private partnership forged by President Trump, Pfizer announces coronavirus vaccine trials effective, preventing infection in 90% of its volunteers. Now, what happens next is incredible. The Pfizer CEO, trying to basically politicize his own vaccine and cozy up to the Joe Biden incoming administration, says that it did not join the administration's partnership, and that their head of vaccine development says, we were never part of Operation Warp Speed. We've never taken any money from the U.S. government or anyone. Now, Crystal, the reason I wanted to cover this is because Pfizer basically got the entire mainstream media yesterday to repeat big pharma talking points, basically in order to own Trump. Because here's actually what happened. Pfizer received, yes, they did not receive development money, but they have a guarantee by the U.S. government to purchase $2 billion, which, might help their bottom line.
Kind of a big incentive.
Kind of a little bit of incentive. Oh, and also Operation Warp Speed greenlit all of their R&D regulatory environment. So basically, this is a story of a public-private partnership. And it's amazing to me because basically what happened here is the media immediately latched on to a pharma talking point, which we know so well here, which is that they create these drugs in the abstract with no government help or incentive. Right. No, are you kidding me? The German government and the U.S. government are the ones who made this vaccine possible. And that's a good thing. I'm happy about it. But this is just an overall mainstream media just being gaslit into basically repeating big pharma talking points, all just to own Trump. Why can't it just be a good story? Yeah, Pfizer has a cool vaccine, and it was developed with public funds and with public assurances, and all Americans are going to get it for free, and that's a goddamn good thing. Can we just leave it at that?
We just leave it there. Well, the thing I like about this story, and I do kind of enjoy the story, is in service of their like partisan cheerleading, everybody got played. So like, you know, the conservatives who would normally be the ones that are first like, oh, pharma, they just go out there and like brave risk takers, creating life-saving medications for us all out of the goodness of their heart. They're the ones who are like, the government did it. Yay, government, great job, government, helping big pharma. And then the liberals, in their desire to own Trump, are like, pharma, they did this all on their own. The government had nothing to do with it, right? So that's what I enjoy about the story. Is everybody ends up like looking completely silly and stupid. Just some bigger context here. Not only does Pfizer have an incentive in downplaying the government role because they want to be part of the anti-Trump narrative, it's actually much bigger than that, because the truth is, if the public really digested how much pharma's profits rely almost exclusively on public funding and research,
R&D,
then we'd have a very different relationship with them, with their level of profits, with the length and scope of their patents. So I just looked up right before this segment something that we talked about here before. Between 2010 and 2016, there were 210 new drugs developed with new molecules. Every single one of those relied to a certain extent on public research. Every one of them. So the reality is, not just with this vaccine, but in almost every single instance, the truly new innovation within the pharmaceutical industry does not come from pharma. It starts with tax dollars and government public research, funded research. Something tells me that a lot of conservatives don't really want to admit that particular piece, and something tells me, right now, liberals, because it undermines their anti-Trump narrative, also want to talk
This is a great win for the United States government and for the United States. I don't know why we can't just accept that, which is that, yes, pharma had all these incentives, and there's this regulatory environment which is very beneficial to them. The government's going to buy those vaccine doses, and then they're going to distribute it to all of us. I think that's a great win for industrial policy, for the future of how we can develop public-private partnership. This is exactly how science was developed by the U.S. government all throughout the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. We have to accept this if you're on the right. These are good things. This produce an empirical good for America.
Okay, so why did Pfizer and the FDA agree to not release news of the vaccine's success in October, as the original protocol would have required? So the original plan was to make a public announcement after 32 cases. Instead, they stopped doing simple lab tests until the day after Election Day, at which point they had 94 cases, triple what the protocol has said they needed for making a public announcement. So Pfizer had the physical evidence in their labs in October that their vaccine had met the hurdle of success, but they chose, with the agreement of the FDA, not to physically process the samples until the day after Election Day. So Pfizer and the FDA conspired to alter the agreed-upon plan, and instead Pfizer refused to even process the crucial samples during the last days before the election to delay having to make a public announcement until after the election. And this ploy may well have cost Trump the election. For a notorious authoritarian, Trump sure gets pushed around and stabbed in the back, even by his own hirelings. And we have an important announcement coming up here from Nick Fuentes. He is apparently disavowing Catboy Kami.
Big Rams says, this Kami guy's a fucking loon. I don't know what he was thinking coming out to these protests. That stunt he pulled this weekend was horrible optics. I agree. It's it's so funny. He was bad optics in the beginning of the year because he was dressing up in an anime costume, and now he's bad optics because he's giving Hitler speeches. So he really is the gift as far as me goes, as far as my image goes, and also ostensibly, if he's going to these protests for everybody else, he is the gift that keeps on giving. So, yeah, and I would encourage him to not go to these things because he clearly doesn't know what's going on, doesn't know what's at stake. That is the absolute last thing we need, is self-serving buffoonishness, really, that is going to sabotage us. And, I've tried to explain this to him before. Not only did I try to convert him to Christianity and to get him to stop being a gross degenerate, but I also tried to tell him to stop being a wignat, because I said, look, what you're doing is going nowhere fast, and actually you're sabotaging what is having, tangible effect on the country, what tangibly will deliver victories for us. He will not listen, he doesn't get it. So it's just not the time or the place. You want to go and do that after inauguration, hey, knock yourself out. Now is really not the time. So I did see that, and it was no good. The good thing is he does not identify with America First. I don't think he even agrees with us on most things. He identifies as a wignat. So I hope the media will not make a distinction, but hopefully other people will.
Powerful, powerful.
like a nitty gritty like that. And also, what if Trump fails to flip Arizona? I think that I don't think Trump necessarily is looking to flip a lot of states, even though he wants to. It's not that he's not going to try to do it, but I think his goal is more stalling on the certification of results so it can go to legislatures, including in Arizona, which is a Republican legislature. And in Nevada, it's not. So if it somehow went to their legislature, they would vote for Biden electors anyway. So that's important to keep in mind. Patrick, anything to say about what Sarah brought up?
I mean, if it does get to the Supreme Court, if Pennsylvania gets to the Supreme Court, I think it's likely probable the Supreme Court, that's my guesstimate, throws out those ballots. I mean, as best I can determine, constitutionally, it seems a little bit of a no-brainer, very much a no-brainer, actually. However, that doesn't mean that that's what the Supreme Court will do. Now, of course, fate has bequeathed to Donald Trump a nominal 6-3 majority, whereas if it was still 5-4, I would say this was, if should it get to the Supreme Court, this was very much in the ballots. Because it's 6-3, I assume that the Trump side has a 5-4 majority, not locked in, but as I say, probable. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if the vote was 5-4 rather than 6-3. It does see, and I think the Alito's, was it Friday, Alito's edict, which, as I understand it, at least initially, Pennsylvania or Philadelphia declined to comply with, of separating those ballots, at least for the time being. I think it was, obviously it was an indication perhaps of how he sees it, but I think it was also, and maybe I'm reading the judicial tea leaves a little too strongly or from the wrong direction.
Okay, we got some breaking news here. Republicans flip both the House and Senate in New Hampshire and the state House in Alaska. Republicans will hold at least 60% of state legislatures. Are you as excited as I am?
But I think it was a signal that the Supreme Court will take a very serious and close look at this. And as you said, I'm not a lawyer, not a constitutional expert, but as I understand it, there are two concerns here on the part of the Constitution, and therefore one hopes the judiciary. There's the one that is, such as this is talked about in the media, there's the Trump campaign doesn't think Donald Trump has been given a fair shake, and he's being, as it were, disenfranchised by this alleged cheating. And that is important if, as many of us think has happened, if there are abnormalities, to put it politely, then he has been unjustly dealt with by the electoral system. However, as I understand it, the larger legal, or should I say constitutional concern is not Donald Trump, but it is the individual voter who selected Donald Trump, right? The millions in Pennsylvania, the 71 million, I'd argue it's probably more than that nationally, who, if he were to lose this election based on nefarious goings on, they have been disenfranchised, right? And again, as I understand it, the constitutional protections for the individual and their vote are sacrosanct, and arguably paramount. So I imagine that the Supreme Court will be as focused, if not more focused, on the potential for Trump voters to have been badly treated by the system as they will Trump himself as the candidate.
And from Wojak, I think this is the last one for you, back to the article. Do you laugh when you see NBC or Economist polls? I've been doing that for a while. I will say NBC had the famous, now infamous, 17-point Biden lead in Wisconsin poll just before the election. And The Economist did a polling aggregation service run by a fella who's named G. Elliott Morris. Exactly what G stands for, I'm not sure. But he has become quite a Twitter celebrity. And I think he's 23 years old. And he rose to prominence in 2018 because he called some midterm races correctly. And so The Economist hired him to do his polling aggregation. And he made very bombastic claims like Joe Biden is very likely to win the race. Joe Biden's likely to win Florida. He has like this, I think Morris said that Biden had like some absurd 80% plus chance of winning Florida and other states too. Even Ohio, he had a higher percentage of winning in Texas. So it's The Economist was without doubt 538 at the New York Times was pretty terrible. But 538 was, The Economist had the worst polling coverage this year of any major publication. And that was largely, entirely, but I won't say entirely, largely because of Morris. And I won't say entirely because The Economist chose to hire this guy to do that, which was rather a bad move, in my opinion. Nothing against a very young fella doing that kind of work. It's great to see, but a major publication sort of pitching its wagon to him when he only had the one midterm under his belt at the age of 23. That's a little much, to say the least. I don't think that was a very wise business decision, but they didn't ask me. But The Economist was particularly horrendous, and I think snapshots of it saying that, Biden is overwhelmingly likely to win North Carolina or something like that, those snapshots will be passed on for years to come, and not in a complimentary way for The Economist. Patrick, anything to say about what Wojak brought up?
Yeah, I mean, The Economist polling was one of the least successful, should I put it like that? And it's disappointing. I mean, I say this as someone who has been reading The Economist, subscribing to The Economist since an age when it was probably unhealthy to do so. So I've always been a tremendous fan and supporter of The Economist. But I have found in this election, especially, it's been a trend, this election especially, their coverage of the American election, which used to be very dispassionate, insightful, but as The Economist always says, no one, we can't be objective, but we can darn well try and succeed at being independent. And I think that's something that they've always done very well at. And I just found that this year their coverage seemed heavily influenced by their polling. And you could say, well, of course, they're paying for these polls and they show them the Biden way ahead, and so naturally it's going to flavor their coverage.
Okay, so according to CNN and ProPublica, there's an important fact check here. No evidence that 14,000 dead people cast ballots in Wayne County, Michigan.
I just thought that the economists, given the huge brains that are working there and the encyclopedic knowledge that many of them have of American politics, that they would have perhaps taken 2016 into more account, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I mean, it's people who criticize us and the other quote unquote outliers are always very, very keen and very happy to personalize it and to assume nefarious mechanisms on our part or bad intentions. And it's all about the money or whatever it is. And I don't know these people. I have absolutely no reason to suggest that to hint that they produce their results with anything but the best of intentions. All I know is that they were off again a lot, and we should all take that into account as we move forward.
Yes, indeed. There was another super chat just coming from Kay Warren, but I don't see a message associated with it. Thank you for it, Kay. But if you have a message, please leave it as a regular comment, and we'll get to it before we go. But now we're going to get back to Patrick's article to start reading it. And this is interesting because Patrick, before we went on, was wondering if people were going to be that interested in an episode like this today now that the election is over. But I think you can tell that, as I mentioned, would be the case. People will be very interested in hearing his perspective all the same. It might be said at this point that Patrick is a veritable e-celebrity, internet celebrity, which is, I don't think necessarily what the polling industry wanted to see. But I would say it's
for my many sins.
I think the polling industry sins are far worse, beyond comparison, actually. But we'll leave that one there. But in your article, it says, if you count the ballot fraud, most pollsters clearly failed. If you don't include the fraudulent ballots, most pollsters failed on a spectacular scale. The accurate pollsters were also the most accurate in 2016, along with Richard Barris's meticulous state-level big data poll and Robert Cahaley's innovative Trafalgar Group swing state surveys. Our Democracy Institute Sunday Express polling pretty much nailed the 2020 election. Why were other pollsters wrong? They relied upon surveys of registered voters that skew Democratic because a third of the respondents don't vote. We survey only likely voters who will actually cast a ballot. That's why we gave the Democrats a 2-point turnout advantage rather than the double-digit advantage often found in media polls. Most pollsters assumed a massive increase in turnout among pro-Democratic millennial, female, and minority voters, so they heavily weighted their results to reflect this flawed assumption. Turnout will be on the scale of the pro-Biden electorate these other polls imagine. Obviously, there's quite a bit for you to comment on there, Patrick, but I will just say that some might say, when you say that the the Democracy Institute pretty much nailed the 2020 election.
Okay, let's get something from Michael Anton
election
here.
Night, early returns show that the president has a significant lead in the states of Georgia and Pennsylvania. 2 days later, we are still counting votes and awaiting the results in those states. Why? Why did a bunch of different states shut down voting on election night? These aren't crackpot questions. These are totally legitimate questions, and most people have not heard the answers. Michael Anton has written a fantastic column on this topic. He's the author of The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. We're happy to have him on tonight. Michael Anton, thanks so much for coming on. You're, among other things, a historian. I know that you care about our system more than any single politician. All of us, I think, should feel that way. It does seem like people have legitimate concerns about whether the system is working fairly. Tell us what your concerns are.
Some of the ones that you mentioned. Why was voting stopped in 5 or 6? I think it was actually 5 states and 6 cities for 4 hours. Why are ballots showing up? Mail-in voting, it has a lot of problems. Some obvious ones. You send ballots out to everyone. You never know who actually receives the ballot, and when they come back, you could be sending them to people who've died without knowing. You could be sending them to people who've moved from the state. So that already has a problem. But there should be one advantage, right? If these things are mailed in, presumably some of them will come in late, but wouldn't most of them be coming in months or weeks ahead of time? So why are we finding big tranches of ballots hours and in some cases even more days after the polls have closed? Shouldn't mail-in ballots already be there somewhere ready to be counted? And your point is exactly the right one. These are questions. They deserve investigations and answers, transparent answers. And when all we get back is, shut up, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're attacking the integrity of our democracy, that doesn't give anybody confidence in the integrity of the system. It makes you suspect that something fishy is going on.
Well, I mean, I would say that censorship and silencing legitimate questions is itself an effort to undermine the legitimacy of our democracy. Who's undermining the democracy? Who's destroying the public's faith in the system? It's not us.
No, definitely not. And look, I would say this. I think the person, ironically, one of the people who will be harmed by this, if this continues and this plays out the way it's looking right now, will be Joe Biden, to be perfectly honest. If I were Joe Biden and I were convinced I won, and I won, comfortably or at least handily in a number of states, and an accurate count would show that, I would be saying to everyone in my party, everyone in my campaign, I would be saying this to all the state elected officials and non-elected officials who are in charge of vote counting, be transparent, be open, let both sides examine this process and see what's going on, because I want the American people, the whole American electorate, including Donald Trump's 67 million voters, I want them all to be convinced that this was fair and that I won legitimately, so that I can govern with the full confidence of the American people in the system. That's what I would want if I were Joe Biden.
Well, because you care about having the confidence of the American people, because you believe in democracy. But people who believe in ruling by force don't really care what voters think, because they're going to make them obey regardless. And that's maybe the difference between you and them.
It suggests...
Go ahead, please finish.
Yeah. No, but it suggests that they must not have total confidence that if there were a completely fair count and if all of these questions were addressed and the anomalies addressed, they must be worried that they wouldn't win. Otherwise, they would be throwing open the books and saying, the president mentioned this and others have mentioned it. There are places where votes are being counted where they literally taped paper in the windows so that people can't look inside. People who think they want a fair counting, they wouldn't do that.
That's exactly right.
People's_pundit. And don't forget, by the way, in the stream category, there is a newsletter signed Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. No, friends. No. They said Joe Biden was going to win because Donald Trump was going to lose pivot counties. Pivot counties, for those who don't know, we like Ballotpedia call them pivot counties, not swing counties. These are counties that were Obama-Trump counties, 200 plus. There are 10 in this country, 10 that have forecasted the election winner in this country for at least 10 election cycles. There are some pivot counties, for instance, Juneau, Wisconsin, that forecast the winner of their state all the time. That's what they said was going to happen here, folks. But that is not what happened. Here's a refresher, and thanks to @RealAmerican. This is what Nate Cohen's Rust Belt poll, which he stole from us, by the way, the idea of a Rust Belt poll. Get your own. This is how you know these people. They're not only not smart, they're not even original. They haven't had original thought in their tiny little heads their entire professional careers. They stole this idea from the Rust Belt, from the Epoch Times, that we did with the Epoch Times, and then they tried to say that they were the real gold standard of it. This is what Nate Cohen told you Wisconsin would look like. What Nate Cohen told you Pennsylvania would look like. Greene County, Pennsylvania, voted 2-1 for Donald.
So that's his wife who's laughing and interjecting in the background. So I was quite enjoying Rich Barris's stream until he said, well, if you go against the United States intelligence agencies, if you're a president, you end up like John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963. So he lost me there. JFK did not go up against the CIA, our intelligence agencies, any more than countless other presidents. Yeah, he had some objections to some things to do with the CIA, but it's not like JFK was trying to wind down the CIA and was just constantly butting heads with the CIA. And there's absolutely no evidence that the CIA had anything to do with Lee Harvey Oswald's assassination of JFK. So I could do without that kind of conspiracy mongering on the part of Rich Barris. It caused me to take him a little less seriously. Right, let's talk Washington Post. The long love affair between Fox News and Trump may be over. Here's how it all soured last week. So, the day of the election, Trump went on Fox and Friends, and he said, Fox is much different now. In the old days, they wouldn't put Sleepy Joe Biden every time he opened his mouth. It's a much different operation. I'm just telling you. So when I wrote a daily blog about the porn industry, I'd be lazy and I'd rely on just certain sources, certain people who I'd talk to most every day, and I just juice them for as many stories as possible. The downside of that is that people started feeling like they owned my blog. They started treating it as their own personal newspaper, and so they would object when I would quote people that they got into feuds with. So Fox has been so generous to Donald Trump over the past few years that he's come to think of it as his own personal network. And so as he faces expulsion from the White House, this is Sarah Ellison writing in the Washington Post, Trump has vowed revenge on the network that propelled his political career. And he may endorse a competitor or even start his own, except for the sad fact that Donald Trump is not very good at running things. Donald Trump has taken plenty of personal guidance from Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity. They advised him on his re-election strategy. They advised him on how to conduct himself in debates, where he should hold his rallies. Trump has also maintained the unswerving support of Laura Ingraham and Jeanine Pirro, both of whom were at the election night party in the White House. Fox was on the big screen TVs as Trump won the key state of Florida, and the room filled with increasing optimism that Trump had again defied the polls until 11:20 p.m. East Coast time, 8:20 p.m. California time, when Fox News called Arizona for Joe Biden with 73% of the expected vote counted. A screeching of tires brought the party to a halt. And Trump erupted in anger, telling others in the White House to get that result changed. His chief of staff, Mark Meadows, phoned Fox News' decision desk repeatedly. Top aide Hope Hicks messaged various people at Fox about how to get the call reversed. Kellyanne Conway got in touch with Brett Baer to complain. Jared Kushner reached out to Rupert Murdoch. Even Trump apparently spoke to Rupert Murdoch, and Murdoch declined to order the decision desk to reverse their call. Now, remember, the Fox decision desk, since the year 2000 election, have not had to reverse one call yet. So, even as White House officials vowed to Fox executives that they had the data from Arizona's Republican governor demonstrating that Trump could still win, and even as all the other major networks continued to hold off on a call, Fox decision desk Anton, Michigan remained unmoved. Stick with us. We'll be right, he told the anchors, and that was the path that Fox chose. It's impossible to overstate the closeness of the relationship between Fox News and the Trump White House. In 2018, Jeanine Pirro complained personally to the president that she'd been unable to get any White House staffers to appear on her show for 2 weeks running. Little wonder, said one administration official, no one wanted to do it every week because it was on Saturday night and it screws up your weekend. But Trump came to the rescue. He volunteered to call into the show himself, and after that, his staff set up a rotation system to make sure that one of them would perform the duty for Jeanine Pirro's show every week. Even as Fox opinion hosts reliably cheered for Trump, the relationship with the network was a problem for top White House staffers, largely because of the president's thrall to what it broadcast. While he was White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly regularly complained to aides that the show, hosted by conspiracy-minded immigration opponent Lou Dobbs on Fox Business Network, had far too much sway over the president. Another former White House official described the constant angst over how Fox might cover certain White House initiatives because of the potential blowback from the president. We were always concerned inside that he'd do a spending deal or make an announcement that was controversial, then Fox would attack him, and then he'd blow up the next day. We'd call the hosts on Fox and say, please, can you tamp it down a bit? We were afraid that the next day he'd rip it up. They were usually pretty good about working with us. But Trump demanded an unattainable level of loyalty from the network. His re-election campaign at one point asked for a bulk discount advertising deal. Trump said no. Recent months, Trump began to complain on Twitter and to his aides that Fox had turned on him. That impression was only heightened when it emerged that Rupert Murdoch was telling associates that the president was going to lose, even as the New York Post, of the Murdoch-controlled property, published a dubious front-page article last month about Hunter Biden. The personal relationship between Murdoch and Trump had cooled. Trump takes any perceived slight from Fox News, especially personally, because he views Fox as my network. I give Fox these mega ratings. It's all me, Trump told advisors. In reality, ratings have been buoyed across all networks by increased audience interest spurred by the drama of the Fox presidency. The fury with which Team Trump fought back against Fox's call for Arizona signified the extent to which it saw it as a dire omen and a betrayal. In the following days, Fox's opinion hosts doubled down on the show of loyalty to the president, even going so far as to cast doubt on their own network's call by repeating Trump's unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. Wednesday evening, Laura Ingraham took to the airways to declare the Democrats were trying to destroy the integrity of our election. Newt Gingrich was even more strident. They watched Joe Biden's Democratic Party steal the election in Philadelphia, steal the election in Atlanta, steal the election in Milwaukee. The more information comes out, the greater the rage is going to be. Sean Hannity told his viewers, we have serious reports of irregularities and fraud. And attorney Sidney Powell alleged on Maria Bartiromo's show that Democrats were flipping votes in the computer system or adding votes that did not exist. And the host, Maria, listened intently without asking the Trump ally to offer proof. But other Fox personnel stood their ground. In the most startling rebuke, Fox cut away from White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany's Monday news conference when she alleged that Democrats were welcoming illegal votes. Whoa, 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 anchor Neil Cavuto said. We have to be very clear. She's charging the other side as welcoming fraud. Unless she has more details to back that up, I can't continue to show this. Fox executive acknowledges that regular viewers are really pissed off at the network. Conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh Says the cable networks are waiting for Fox to declare the race. They want you to eat crow. They want you guys to be the ones to repudiate Trump. So Trump's call on Arizona, no other network has matched it. So ultimately, Fox called Pennsylvania in the presidency for Joe Biden on Saturday, 16 minutes after CNN. Some officials say Trump is angrier with Fox News than he is about his actual loss. Trump advisors long discussed the possibility that when Trump leaves office, he will support a news network to compete with Fox or to start his own.
Donald Trump.
I presume you're talking about considering what we would perceive to be legitimate votes, as opposed to the avalanche of Democratic votes that started coming in the middle of the night that were totally unaccounted for, by the way, before they started coming in. Nobody seemed to know that they existed, but all of a sudden they just appeared in the middle of the night when most people had gone home very conveniently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were, as you would probably expect, during election night, as best I could, bouncing around, I was, tracking the results in real time, and we got to a point where I was double checking with colleagues and others because, naturally, you're confident in your own numbers, and we thought we were going to have a good election. But prior to the counting stopping in interesting places, coincidentally, we thought, my God, this is ridiculous. It was new that we'd missed on one or two states by the look of it. As it turns out, we did. But overall, and nationally, in terms of the states themselves, or certainly the important states, that this was exceeding our expectations. And I was getting. We had one of your viewers kindly pointed out that I lost him a couple of $100. I think it was. Maybe it was pounds. If it's pounds, it's even worse. A couple $100. And I was flooded with texts and calls from people saying, thank you for saying.
Yes, Murdoch has a daughter, Elizabeth, who hates Trump. He has a son, James, who hates Trump, but neither child has any influence over Fox News. It's Lachlan Murdoch who oversees Fox News, and he is as right-wing as Tucker Carlson.
Saying this was going to happen because I've put X amount on it and da-da-da-da. And then, of course, when the counting started soon after it stopped. But when, for example, Republican poll workers came back in a few hours later and discovered that there were new numbers, as we all did, the precise nature of our projections didn't look so, were more imprecise at that point. So it's very interesting. But as I touched on earlier, even if you take the tallies that we've been instructed to believe, you still see, for example, that our vote for Donald Trump is pretty bang on in terms of the popular vote. I think there are Trump votes out there that haven't been counted, but nevertheless, in terms of what the tallies currently tell us. And if you break it down racially, or break it down, one of the things, and because you're very conscientious, Joseph, and I know you drilled out the details, and we've always supplied all of our questions and answers to the paper, and they're generally printed, if not all of them, certainly most of them. And one of those that there was printed was the religion question, as in the Trump's approval by religion and that sort of thing. And you'll see there that we really nailed Catholic vote and the Jewish votes and all these sorts of things, which when you combine it in race and religion and party ID and all these sorts of things, they don't individually by themselves prove anything or even demonstrate anything, perhaps more than something interesting. But you put them all together, and you sort of build sort of paint by numbers, as it were, and then you build a picture of what the electorate is looking like on election night. And that's how we were able to double check, as it were, and see that the breakdown that we forecast was largely coming into play. And therefore, the overall numbers by state and nationally were adding up and made sense. And I think there's, even with, if the numbers we have today are the final numbers, which I think we all know they won't be exactly, but even if they are, which is the worst case scenario for Trump, you'll still see that most of our numbers hold up pretty well. It's frustrating that we don't yet may never have the final figures, because I'd sure like to be able to stand here and say I'm 100% sure that we got this really, really smack on. But all I can say is that I'm highly confident of that, and based on what we know already, we know it was a good election for us, as it was for the likes of Barris and Trafalgar, Susquehanna. I think the four of us are the ones that came closest by some distance to the mark. In some cases, we each had very, very accurate calls, for example, on particular states.
And to resume, the actual somewhat higher turnout was evenly divided among new voters from both parties. How did pollsters miss 5 million new Trump voters? They refused to accept the shy Trump voter was real in 2016, so they didn't look for them in 2020. We knew they were real, and we found far more of them this year. This time, shy Trump voters were disproportionately black males in urban areas and suburban white women. This data confirmed the significant movement of black voters toward Trump and the movement of a segment of suburban white women back to Trump. As a result, we predicted his higher black vote to the actual percentage point. We also identified, due to Trump's pro-law and order stance, that he'd only suffer minor rather than seismic losses among suburban women. Patrick, anything to say about any of that?
I mean, I think I largely covered that earlier. But yes, I mean, if you don't accept that there is a certain evolution, there is a certain variable of dynamic at play in the electorate, in this case, the shy or hidden Trump voter, then you're not going to measure for it, and you're not going to be able to quantify it. And obviously, and as we've discussed, I think more than.
Okay, so one of the most common arguments for voter fraud, Dennis Prager invokes this argument a lot, is invoking motive, means, and opportunity. So this must come from movies or TV. People think that this is a killer argument. It's not a killer argument. It doesn't convict anyone. Prosecutors don't work this way. At best, it is an opening for possible further investigation. So stating that Democrats had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to carry out massive voter fraud in this recent election is not evidence of voter fraud. It's not even a strong argument for massive vote fraud. At best, it is a signal towards investigating possible vote fraud. Claiming that voter fraud is hard to prove is not a strong argument on behalf of widespread voter fraud. Most great accomplishments are difficult. Statistical correlations and statistical regressions don't prove massive voter fraud. At best, once again, they are signposts pointing towards possible fraud. As prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi noted in his great book, Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, many conspiracy theorists embellish the motive argument to prove that a particular group killed Kennedy by saying that it had the motive, means, and opportunity to do so. They present this almost as a prosecutorial legal brief. But in my years as a prosecutor, I never once used the phrase. I don't know any seasoned prosecutor who has, though I assume some do, and I am aware of this legal colloquialism. Much more so than motive, means, and opportunity are virtually worthless as evidence of guilt, unless, of course, you can show that no other living human or very few other living humans had the means or the opportunity. To illustrate how empty the concept of motive, means, and opportunity is, let's take the Kennedy assassination. Any of the thousands of citizens of Dallas who hated Kennedy with a passion would have had a motive to kill him, and any of them who owned a gun or a rifle had the means. If they were anywhere along Kennedy's motorcade route, they would have had the opportunity. So again, motive, means, and opportunity hardly gets one to first base. Even if all three are present, a prosecutor still has to show that the person or group who had them committed the crime. Prosecutors focusing heavily on motive, means, and opportunity is almost an implied admission by him that he has very little evidence that the defendant did, in fact, commit the crime. So a lot of the low IQ talk about massive voter fraud in this 2020 election claims, the Democrats had motive, means, and opportunity. So that's a tell that you're dealing with someone who has not really thought through the issue. There may well be massive voter fraud in this 2020 election, but invoking motive, means, and opportunity is not a strong argument.
Once, Joseph, over the months, I've stressed that as more sophisticated the technology attached to polling becomes, the art of polling actually becomes more important. It's so hard to reach a representative sample. It's so hard to get people on the phone. It's so hard to get certain groups, so much harder to get certain groups on the phone than it is others. And given this social desirability bias, that is this shy Trump vote, which has been a reality now for 4 years, there comes a point where you have to either say, I'm not going to look for it, I either don't believe it or it's just too complicated, or you're going to look for it, recognize it's there, and sort of place an asterisk on your numbers to say the final numbers may be different because we think there may be this element of hidden vote for Trump, or as we did and as Trafalgar did, attempt to identify not just who they are and where they are, but how many of them there are and what portion of the larger turnout that will be. And that is art as much as it is science. And the fact that there were several million extra Trump votes, I can't claim that every single one of them was a shy Trump vote, and I wouldn't do that. But I would suggest to your viewers that a good portion of that extra vote was shy. And so therefore, we are not us alone, but we take some satisfaction in realizing, seeing the real numbers and appreciating that in that regard, we were far closer to the mark than most.
And the article continues. Other correct calls include Trump's precise national popular vote percentage in identifying the economy as the crucial issue. We forecast a large proportion of Hispanics voted for Trump, especially in Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. Jewish voters also chose Trump in higher than expected numbers. We forecast this exactly. Ditto for Trump's spectacular evangelical vote. As well as correctly forecasting Trump's narrow margin with independents, we identified the exact high percentage of Republicans voted for Trump, which confirmed his base's devotion. We called Florida within a few decimal points, forecast Trump's healthy margins in Iowa and Ohio, and his modest victories in North Carolina and Georgia. We projected his forthcoming wins in Arizona and Nevada. I wrote last Sunday that should our Biden popular vote projection be off by a couple of points, it would reflect voter fraud rather than our having missed a Biden landslide. My words were prescient. Anything to say about any of that, Patrick?
Well, I mean, I think between us, we've covered most of what I would claim were some of the successes that we had. I don't want to bore your viewers by sort of banging those drums any harder than I have already. But I'm glad you quoted me, quoting myself from my previous article. And the reason
Okay, New York Magazine has an interesting, lengthy essay on how the New York Times is coming to a reckoning with itself. In the Trump years, the New York Times has become less dispassionate and more crusading. The dust-up has laid bare a divide that has become increasingly tricky for the New York Times. A large portion of the paper's audience, a number of its employees, and the president himself saw it as aligned with the resistance. This demarcation horrified the old guard, but it seemed to make for good business. Trump era forced a rushed period of reflection. As part of the discussion with Dean Baquet, the editor, when we first described Trump as lying on the front page, Carolyn Ryan, one of 14 masthead editors at the time, said it took 45 minutes. The incident happened in September 2016 when Donald Trump renounced his own birtherism and falsely accused Hillary Clinton of starting the conspiracy theory. Feels kind of quaint, Ryan said of the decision, but at the time, it was a shattering departure. Yes, you don't normally see in the mainstream media that in a news article they will accuse politicians of lying. It was also a shattering departure for Times journalists to walk into the newsroom after Trump's 2016 victory and find their colleagues in tears. A neutral objectivity had long been core to the way the paper saw itself, its public mission, and its business interests. Abe Rosenthal, legendary New York Timesman, had the words, "He kept the paper straight," carved on his tombstone, even if it was an open secret that the Times was published by and for coastal liberals. In 2004, the New York Times' first public editor, Daniel Okrent, answered the headline above one of his columns, "Is the New York Times a liberal newspaper?" in the first sentence of his story. Of course it is. Chat says, Luke doesn't care about Jeffrey Epstein or Phil Girardi or the black helicopters raiding the Nexium data vault at Wilshire and Lucas in downtown LA. Luke never disavows the Chinese communists. When was the last time you heard Luke address all the missing cats near his home? The whiteness of the New York Times has sometimes been a problem because it makes a bunch of non-white people run around like Cassandras. At an all-staff meeting shortly after the 2016 election, Baquet, New York Times editor, told the paper staff that it could not become part of the loyal opposition to Trump. The Times would report on Trump aggressively but fairly, so the paper could retain its journalistic integrity. But the paper's claim to holding the independent center was slipping as the staff came to grips with an increasingly polarized audience. Journalists were caught between the desire to appear objective to right-leaning readers and sources while avoiding backlash from left-leaning ones, and wishing they could get back to the job they thought they had signed up for. Most of the pressure to serve as the loyal opposition was coming from the outside. A Pew poll found that 91% of people who consider the Times their primary news source identify as Democrats, roughly the same as the percentage of Fox News viewers who identify as Republicans. Then the New York Times editorial page editor James Bannon was ousted after he posted an op-ed from Senator Tom Cotton making the case for Donald Trump possibly sending in troops to quell domestic disturbance. To those who believed James Bennett's effort to present occasionally controversial views for public consideration was core to the Times' mission, the decision to have James Bennett leave was a retreat from principle. I call it a disgrace, said Daniel Okrent, the former public editor. I think that James Bennett's firing was as meaningful for how the paper is perceived as Jason Blair was. The New York Times had long been a relative monoculture, Ivy League educated white people writing for Ivy League educated white people. Some blame this bubble on the paper's dismissal of Trump in 2016, not that any other mainstream news media outlet had done better. Why does Luke have a closet full of clothes made of cat pelts? Good question. As business boomed in the Trump era, the New York Times has gone on a hiring spree with a particular focus to diversify its ranks. 40% of newsroom employees hired since 2016 have been people of color. Fundamental schism at the New York Times is institutionalist versus insurrectionist. One source said, "You can refer to me as a woke millennial reporter." The institutionalists were willing to play the internal Game of Thrones required to ascend the masthead because they never wanted to work anywhere else. The insurrectionists had often come from digital outlets or tech companies or advocacy groups and could imagine leaving the New York Times at any time. Employees of Wirecutter, the most capitalist arm of the Times editorial operation, appeared to be the most socialist. I love my job. I like my co-workers, but it has not been my goal since I was 12 to work for the New York Times, the woke millennial reporter told me. Not so blinded by how great the place is that I'm going to ignore the problems. After Trump's election in 2016, subscriptions grew at 10 times their normal rate. Times has gone from just over 3 million subscribers at the beginning of the Trump presidency to its record of more than 7 million last month. It has hired hundreds of journalists to staff a newsroom that is now 1,700 people strong, bigger than ever. New York Times stock has risen fourfold since Trump took office. Identifying as a reader of the New York Times has become a marker of resistance. Parts of the paper amount to service journalism for participatory democracy. There's still this huge gap between what the staff and the audience and the management want. One prominent Times reporter said, "The audience is resistance mums and overwhelmingly white. The staff is more interested in identity politics. Management is newspaper people. There's an impulse to want to be writing for a different audience. What the audience wants most of all is opinion. On a relative basis, section is the paper's most widely read. Opinion produces roughly 10% of the Times output while bringing in 20% of its page views." Now that the newspaper has switched from an advertising to a subscription model, employees on both the editorial and business sides of the Times said the company's secret sauce was the back-end system in place for getting casual readers to subscribe. 2018, a group of data scientists at the Times unveiled Project Feels, set of algorithms that could determine what emotions a given article might induce. Hate was associated with stories that used the words tax, corrupt, or me too, while stories that included the words first met and York generally produced happiness. But the modern love column was only so appealing. Hate drives readership more than any of us care to admit, one employee on the business side told me. Twitter presented innumerable headaches, with reporters having to be chastised for being overtly political, simply sounding un-Timesian in their pursuit of likes and retweets. There's a very sad need for validation, one Times journalist who has tweeted tens of thousands of times told me. Some of the trickiest journalistic questions have centered on what the Times is or isn't willing to say. After James Bennett's ouster, the CEO, Sulzberger, met with a columnist for the opinion section who had expressed consternation about the decision. Sulzberger promised the columnist that the Times would not shy away from publishing pieces to which the Times' core audience might object. "We haven't lost our nerve," Sulzberger said. "Yes, you have," the columnist told Sulzberger. "You lost your nerve in the most explicit way I've ever seen anyone lose their nerve. You can say people are still going to be able to do controversial work, but I'm not going to be the first to try. You don't know what you will be able to do because you are not in charge of this publication. Twitter is. As long as Twitter is editing this bitch, you cannot promise me anything." While Barry Weiss's description of a young woke mob taking over the paper was roundly criticized, several Times employee I spoke to saw truth to the dynamic. They were annoyed that the New York Times union had presented a list of demands that included sensitivity reads on stories before they were published. This summer, several union members started compiling examples of Times journalism they deemed problematic. The insurrectionists had plenty to complain about as well. The paper didn't cover class half as well as it did race, and a proposed LGBTQ plus newsletter was considered tiptoeing into advocacy or activism. I've been told straight up that I can't have racist and Trump in the same sentence. Wesley Morris told me maybe I can in the same sentence, but not right next to each other. The ideological turf war at the New York Times had become the most heated around the 1619 Project. Special issue of the Times Magazine focused on centering American history around the lingering stain of slavery, which was then developed into a podcast, a book, an elementary school curriculum, and the centerpiece of a Times campaign. The groundbreaking project won a Pulitzer Prize, but has since come under attack. Some have questioned its historical accuracy. Others have probed its ideological intentions. President Trump has used it as a political cudgel. Dean Baquet, the editor, calls it one of the most important pieces of journalism the Times has produced under my tenure as editor. Okay, I wonder what Tucker Carlson has to say.
Central demand of the American left. Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. There is so much going on right now, so much from so many directions, that at some point it's worth pausing, turning off the headlines for a moment, and framing what we're seeing in order to understand it. What you're watching right now is not simply a battle between two political parties or even two opposing worldviews. It is deeper than that. And if you want to understand what's really going on, we're going to isolate just one slogan that kind of decodes it all. The slogan is defund the police. Defund the police. You probably haven't heard that for a while. In the weeks before the election, no elected Democrat would say those words in public. So effectively, they just disappeared. Yet in a lot of ways, defund the police defined this year in American politics. For months, it was the central demand of the American left. It was the main thing they wanted. And there was never any question about what defunding the police would mean. And really, it was a remarkably straightforward slogan. Defund the police meant defund the police. Cut off their salaries, get rid of them. But why? What was the point of getting rid of the police, of defunding them? That's the real question. It's baffling, really. In conventional politics, the goal is always to improve the lives of your voters. Give people something they want, and in return, they will vote for you. That's the exchange. But who exactly wanted to defund the police? Was there a constituency for that? Whose life was going to be improved by abolishing law enforcement? Was there evidence that anyone's would be improved? No, there wasn't. No academic study or white paper from some think tank in Washington even suggested that defunding the police would help anyone. In fact, dozens of studies over decades proved exactly the opposite. It would make things much worse. And that makes sense. How would dangerous neighborhoods become safer once there was no one around to stop crime and violence? Well, obviously they wouldn't become safer. That's ridiculous. If you thought about it for 15 seconds, you would know that defunding the police inevitably would wind up killing people. That's not an exaggeration. Literally, Americans would die if you defunded the police. They knew that, but they did it anyway. We've never seen anything like that happen here. We've had a lot of bad ideas in America over the years, but most of them hurt people by accident. In the late 1950s, doctors prescribed, for example, thalidomide to pregnant women because they sincerely thought it would help. When the drug turned out to cause horrifying birth defects, they were shocked and contrite. The well-meaning liberals who designed our welfare system never dreamed it would destroy the black family and make poverty worse. That was an unintended consequence of a good intention. That is not what is happening here. The left called for defunding the police knowing full well what would happen next. Chaos. Chaos was the whole point of it. More rape, more robbery, more murder. Those weren't unfortunate byproducts of a noble idea. Those were the intended consequences. Think about that for a minute. The people behind defunding the police tried to destroy society itself. That's not politics. Tearing down civilization isn't a political position. It's something much, much darker than that. It's a kind of spiritual battle. That sounds like overstatement, but it's not. We should understand the stakes here. For a long time, though, we didn't understand them. In fact, when the defund the police movement started this summer, few knew what was going on. As with so many faddish hysterias that sweep our culture, most people just went along with it. They were afraid not to. Everyone else was. So when BLM vandals painted "defund the police" on a major thoroughfare in Washington, right near the White House, the incompetents who run that city let it stand for months. They were proud of it. They said so. Gadflies like Sandy Cortez from Westchester went on television to explain that defunding the police was cool. It's what all the kids were doing. It's the future, and therefore better.
It's funny because when people ask me what does a world where we defund the police, where, you know, defunding police looks like, I tell them it looks like a suburb.
Defunding the police looks like a suburb, just like the one Sandy Cortez grew up in, with lush lawns and pool parties and hip moms and Range Rovers and the pickup line. Fun! But the reality of defunding the police was very different. America's cities did not become suburbs thanks to Sandy Cortez's idea. As summer continued, here's what they looked like. No, that's not Sandy Cortez's leafy hometown. That's the reality of defunding the police. Our cities burned. The elderly were beaten and killed by thugs. Crime skyrocketed in every metro area in the country. Things fell apart as they were always going to. No normal person in either party could support this. So the architects of defund the police did what they could to silence all discussion of the topic. Shh, don't talk about it. Here's Lisa Bender, the president of the Minneapolis City Council, explaining that Americans who were uncomfortable with their homes being broken into in a world without police must be, and of course you can guess the punchline here, racists. Watch.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police-free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
So calling the police is an act of bigotry. Self-defense is immoral. That was Lisa Bender's position. Again, that's not a political position, that's a religion. But increasingly, that was the posture of the entire Democratic Party. And you know what happened next, inevitably. By August, shootings in New York City had increased by more than 80% over the year before. 80%! There is no precedent for that because it's never happened. Defunding the police was killing Americans in huge numbers. And yet, remarkably, the very people who claim so loudly to care about gun violence decided not to notice what was happening. They never mentioned it. By September, when virtually every person who could afford it had fled the cities in fear of disorder and chaos, Kamala Harris was still repeating the same BLM-approved talking points, still attacking the police. Here she is in a tape she certainly wishes didn't exist.
Black Lives Matter has been the most significant agent for change within the criminal justice system, because it has been a counterforce to the force within the system that is so grounded in status quo and in its own traditions, many of which have been harmful and have been discriminatory in the way that they've been enforced.
If Republicans had been smart, that would have been a political ad last month. Black Lives Matter has been the most significant agent for change within the criminal justice system. What does that mean? Well, Black Lives Matter had only one demand of the justice system, and they shouted it over and over again into bullhorns in our streets. Defund the police! Defund the police! That was their demand. They said so. They didn't hide it. So in many places, the authorities did just that. And you know what happened next. In Minneapolis, which was the first city in America to embrace this lunacy, more than 100 cops are now leaving the force. Crime has become so bad in Minneapolis that the very politicians who once demanded that we defund the police are now begging for more police. That's happening tonight. City officials are now considering bringing in officers from other jurisdictions to restore order and keep citizens from being killed. Violent crime there is up 22% over last year. How'd that happen? You know how it happened, and voters do too. Thankfully, this has been a disaster for the Democratic Party. Not profound enough, but still, no one's for it. Who is for defunding the police? Well, pretty much no one, it turns out. Crime and chaos scare the hell out of homeowners, taxpayers, job holders, anyone with children or pets or cars or furniture or any expectation of life beyond this afternoon. Defunding the police is nihilism, and everyone knows that. Polls show that Hispanic voters really hate the idea, and it's one of the main reasons so many voted Republican last week. You would have to be a desperately unhappy gender studies major with a degree from Duke to think defunding the police was a wise idea. And it turns out that's the entire constituency for it. Unmarried, unhappy gender studies majors from Duke. That's not enough people to win an election. And some of the smarter Democratic leaders are starting to figure that out.
Jimmy Harrison started to plateau when defund the police showed up with a caption on TV right across his head. That stuff hurt Jimmy. And that's why I spoke out against it a long time ago.
Right.
I've always said that these headlines can kill a political effort.
Jim Clyburn, ladies and gentlemen, telling it like it is. Defunding the police is a bad idea because it can, quote, kill a political effort. Oh, not a bad idea because it kills human beings, thousands of the poorest people in our society, which it measurably does. No one disputes that. No, it's a bad idea because it can kill a political objective. And that's the language the Democratic Party and its leaders can understand. So it's unlikely we'll be hearing a lot more about defunding the police. In fact, no one will ever again use that slogan. At some point, it'll be like it never happened. What was that? Something out of history. But it did happen. And it had massive consequences for all of us. You should remember it. James Craig is the chief of police in Detroit, and we're happy to have him on tonight. Chief Craig, you never fell for this in Detroit. You never defunded the police. I don't think anyone called for it there. Why didn't you decide to defund the police?
You know, I got to tell you, Tucker, let me just say thank you for, I love being on your show. You call it like it is. And I got to tell you, defunding the police is comical and ridiculous. And you know why? As a police chief, police officers, you work for who? The community.
Right.
And the communities that are ravaged by violence, the last thing they want, Tucker, is to defund the police. Look, I started this organization many years ago and was laid off. That's defunding the police. When I came back 34 years later, they had taken 10% of the police officers' pay. That's defunding the police. Let me tell you what the community says. We don't want defunding the police. We want more police. We support you. And these are the communities.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dennis Prager Show. On this Tuesday, in a troubled America, I might say, may I give some kudos to Tucker Carlson on the depth and courage of his commentaries. They are an absolute delight to the conscience and to the mind. To say that there is nothing comparable on the left is like saying that I cannot play the violin well. I can't play the violin.
Okay, that's going to do it for tonight. Take care, everyone. Good night, and God bless. Bye-bye.